Heavenly Father, today we put on the full armor to protect us against attack. We put on the belt of truth to protect against lies and deception. We put on the breastplate of righteousness to protect our hearts from the temptations. We put on the gospel of peace on our feet to walk in your light, peace, and freedom with the Holy Spirit. We rebuke anxious thoughts. We take up your shield of faith for protection to block and destroy all the darts and threats thrown at us by the enemy. We put on the helmet of salvation to cover our minds and thoughts, reminding us that we are children of a mighty King. We are forgiven, set free, saved by the blood of Jesus. We take up the sword of the Spirit, your living word, that has the power to demolish strongholds and is sharper than any double-edged sword. We come to you, Lord, in prayer daily. In Jesus' mighty name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Thank you.
Yes, girl. What's up, everyone? Welcome to The Imagination. I'm your host, Emma, and today I am honored to introduce to you all targeted individual, sexual abuse, and Hollywood sex kitten survivor, podcaster, Mafia Goddaughter, professional singer, survivor advocate, entrepreneur, and all-around inspiration, Casey Sunshine. I met Casey recently through some mutual friends on Twitter, and I am so excited to get to share her testimony on this podcast today. Casey was born into a Kansas City Mafia family, and due to the gifts passed down to her through her family's genealogy and bloodline, as well as her natural talents for singing, she was targeted from a young age and was molested by 5 different people by the age of 11. She was offered up by her mother to the satanic Hollywood agencies and found herself repeatedly being fondled by the rich and famous at her professional singing gigs, starting at age 7 and 8. Casey was trafficked through several foster care homes when school was in session, changing schools 18 times by her junior year. She and her brother were severely physically and emotionally abused by their mother, but experienced a few years of protection as a Mafia Goddaughter until she returned to foster care and was violently raped twice at age 14. After blaming herself, Casey sought forgiveness and devoted her life to Jesus Christ and left her home to live life on her own at the age of 15. She began therapy at age 17 and found helpful tools of recovery for her trauma. She has since been providing free support for sexual trauma survivors for 29 years now and is a true hero in the survivor community. One of the things that I love most about Casey is that she had everything and everyone in her life trying to tear her down and shut her up. And not only did they fail, but they underestimated her and didn't expect that she would grow up to be a force to be reckoned with, and that the abuses that were meant to destroy her would be used to help and heal others. Casey Sunshine is exactly as her name sounds, a ray of sunshine, a beacon of hope, and a light in the darkness. And I know you will all fall in love with her as much as I have. So please grab a pen and paper and give Casey your full and undivided attention. She deserves it. Before I finish introducing today's guest, I just wanted to give a quick reminder that if you are a survivor whistleblower who wants to share your story in the podcast, or who wants to share any information privately with me, you can email me at imagineabetterworld2020@gmail.com. I'd also love your support on my Substack, where I'm journaling as an outlet for me personally to reflect on my podcast, the guests, and my advocacy work. And you can find me there at www.emmacatherine.substack.com. All of my social media links are also in the show notes, and I want you all to know how eternally grateful I am for all the love, empathy, and compassion you each show to each brave guest that comes on the show. So you guys, without further ado, please help me in introducing today's guest of honor, woman of God, survivor advocate, overcomer, content creator, voice for the voiceless, warrior, and the brightest ray of light, the one, the only, Casey Sunshine. Casey, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Thank you so much for having me. I do want to correct the bloodline issue just a little bit, and that is that I wasn't born into the Mafia family. My family was targeted by the Mafia, and we were literally brought into their family and made godchildren, my brother and I. And yes, so my bloodline is actually Irish and American Indian and a little bit of everything else. So when it comes to like my mom's side and my dad's side, we have American Indian on both sides, a lot of Irish. So that's why I have this red hair. I have 5 sons, and they have a lot of red in their beards because they're at that age now. So that what we are more than anything is not bloodline families, but targeted individual families. Now, I want to clarify that because, and I'm going to clarify that a little later. But what I want to do is I really want to start with the fact that um, these these family lines, the ability to sing and to comprehend music and things like that are definitely genetic. So my mother was a phenomenal singer. I do not take any of that from her. Her talent was absolutely phenomenal. She was my aunt, her sister was an opera singer. She sang in 6 languages. Their father, my grandfather, had the most beautiful voice I've ever heard on a man, and he was an American Indian. And he sang in many chants. He was like a chanter, and it was very calming. And he was one of the few good men in my childhood who never tried to molest me. Was my mom's father. He was a good man, but he was married to a very wicked woman who had some chemical imbalances and who raised my mom, her brother, and her sister. So my brother is a professional comedian in Hollywood and has been for almost 40 years now. So my mom wanted to be rich and famous more than anything. So between two families, ironically, between St. Louis, Missouri and Kansas City, Missouri, my mom and my dad's family kind of grew up together. So my mom and dad got married when my mom was only 16 years old. I think my dad was 4 or 5 years older. And they had my brother when my mom was 18. He was born in Anaheim, California, because my mom was out here in California trying to get rich and famous, working for the Kansas City Mafia because of her amazing talent that they had already identified in her childhood. And my brother was born when she was 18, and I was born when she was 19. So we are Irish twins. We we're also Christmas babies. So I'm a Christmas Eve baby. He's a Christmas Day baby, and make a mental note of that because that is something that when I say they, certain people use to target us. The fact that we're a singing family, singing, dancing, and the fact that we were born Christmas Day and Christmas Eve. So one day a year, I get to call my brother when I was a kid and say, "Ha ha, I'm the same age as you." And then as he got older, he's like, "Ha ha, you're as old as me." But yeah, we're Irish twins because we're less than 12 months apart. So when I was only 6 months old and my brother was 18 months old, my mother wanted to be rich and famous more than anything. So my dad abandoned us. So she put us on a plane out of California and dropped us in Kansas City with her very, very abusive mom. Now, she knew that her dad was a wonderful human being, but she also knew that her mother was chemically imbalanced and very abusive. And so I was just a 6-month-old baby. And my brother being 18 months old at the time, my grandmother, she was a religious fanatic. So it's kind of amazing that I came around to loving Christ and living for Christ like I do, because she would watch the 700 Club all day long and nothing else, never anything else. And at some point when I got older, I told her, because I remember looking at Kenneth Copeland and thinking, that man is not right. He's not a good human. So, and she got very upset with me that I would say things like that. But I could see I had this discernment. I didn't like Pat Robertson, and I didn't like Kenneth Copeland. And she would watch them endlessly. But she would also do something very unfortunate. When I was 3 years old, my uncle, my mom's brother, started molesting my brother and I in the basement of their Kansas City home. So my grandmother caught us in the basement, and instead of punishing my uncle, I was punished. And I was given a speech that little girls cannot be resisted by men or boys, that we could never wear lipstick or a skirt. And so my uncle, even though he was caught molesting my brother and I when we were only 3 and 4 years old, respectively, I was the only one that got punished. And then my grandmother would perform horrible things on me where she would put me in the bathtub. My brother and I, we had this little bubble bath, the innocence of a child in a bubble bath, but my brother was left alone to play in the bubbles, whereas I was pulled out, trigger warning. I was pulled out and my vagina was rubbed raw. I was given douches and enemas and speeches about how dirty my vagina was and how I had this, um, you know, essence about me that I had to protect myself against men because they would not be able to resist me. So this was something that was like drilled into my mother's head. And so she went off to Hollywood, put lipstick and a skirt on, and did exactly what her mother said would get her targeted. And it did, of course, get her targeted, and it also got us targeted. So we lived through that through our very young years, and then luckily we were not welcome there. You would think that our grandparents would say, "Oh, it's wonderful to have you," but they were not happy that we were there. My mother, for one, she was making really good money working these mafia gigs. She was being paid well, but she wasn't paying them at all. She just dumped us onto her family. So they were very upset. They were regularly complaining about what a burden we were. It was known that we were not loved, we were a burden. And my brother had hyperactivity disorder. So he was just, literally swinging from the curtains. And so I developed this thing called good girl syndrome, which is not a good thing. It's where you try to be perfect to control the, psychotic adults in the situation. So I was at a very, very young age, I was always trying to manage my brother. And luckily, they didn't want to deal with us when the school year started. So they shipped us over to another family foster care situation. So that's where you had mentioned that by the age of 11, I was molested and raped by 5 different males before the age of 11. And that included my uncle, who was, trigger warning, performing oral sex on me and sodomizing my brother for many, many years. So in my brother's defense, he did grow up to worship Satan in Hollywood, but I was the lucky one. I was basically foreplay, and my brother was, he was finishing with my brother. So I'll come back again a little bit. I try to go through a chronological order because it's kind of the way I keep my focus. So we went to another family foster situation on my dad's side of the family in order to start school. But our mother, being this famous Hollywood starlet and singing, that she would pull us out of school. We missed so much school that it's really just kind of bizarre how much school we missed. So we would travel with her on the road. And by the age of 7 and 8 years old, respectively, we were singing like the Partridge Family. So my mother, when I was still small enough to stand on the front seat of her Galaxy 500 with an 8-track tape of Dionne Warwick and Aretha Franklin in the radio, she taught me to sing from my diaphragm and develop this diaphragm, so that when I began to sing as even 7 or 8 years old, when I was on stage in Las Vegas, New Mexico, and California, New York, all over the country, there was this little girl that could just belt out the song. And they imagine, I mean, if even now when I sing and people don't actually see me, that they think I'm a Black woman. I sing like a Black woman because that's how my diaphragm was trained. So our signature song as a family, like the Partridge Family, was Proud Mary. But I was put on stage, and I will tell you that one of the first memories, big memories that I have of traveling in these mafia gigs where there was a lot of rich and famous people who were always touching us, fondling us, was in Las Vegas, in the Las Vegas area, for the muscular dystrophy telethon. Now, I want you to remember that because it has relevance for how we were targeted very specifically with regard to muscular dystrophy. So those of you who know Jerry Lewis would always do an MDA telethon, and he would get the local talent. So Dean Martin would always accompany him, and oftentimes Frank Sinatra. So I'm speaking specifically of 1976, where we went to Vegas, and I was born in 1964, so I was very young. In 1976, we went to Las Vegas. My mom performed on the television station. We went around and collected money in the local neighborhoods and poured it into a fishbowl on the stage. And I spent several days and nights, because the muscular dystrophy telethon is specifically where Jerry Lewis stays awake for like 3 days in a row to collect money for muscular dystrophy. So he doesn't sleep. And so they bring on Dean Martin, who's drunk from sunup to sundown, who fondles children, who molested and fondled me, French kissed me, would hold on to me. Frank Sinatra, who never touched me, but he was on the scene. So here I was, this little girl, hanging out with Evel Knievel at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning in the back rooms of these hotels. And by the way, Evel Knievel was very kind to me. People have asked, and he gave my brother this amazing track with a motorcycle, and it was no one else had a track system as cool as my brother, because he got it directly from Evel Knievel. So that was one of the cool memories that we had. So he was an awesome person, but I have to say Dean Martin was a horrible human being. He was always drunk. And I've heard stories about Jerry Lewis, but I never had any negative experiences with him or Frank Sinatra, but I noticed that they drank a lot. Now, after they do these performances, I would go on stage. Now, my signature song was Jesus Christ Superstar, I Don't Know How to Love Him. So if you know this song, imagine this. You've got a little girl, 7 or 8 years old, who's dressed up. My hair was done up in a beehive. I spent the day at the beauty salon. So I had full makeup, bright red lipstick, whole photo opportunity at this huge hotel. And then I come on stage halfway through my mom's show. I perform I Don't Know How to Love Him. Now, in this song, the singer sings that she's trying to figure out how to seduce Jesus because she's had so many men before. So if you know the song, and I've had so many men before in very many ways, he's just one more. Can you imagine a 7-year-old little girl singing a song about how many men she's had before? I sang that song. And then after I would sing, I haven't sang it since I was a child, except for times like this.
You
I
have such
go,
a beautiful voice, by the way. Oh my gosh, I wasn't expecting that. That was beautiful. Even though I know
well,
the words, like trying to put it in context is a little, a little gross to think about a girl singing that, but you really do have a beautiful voice. You're very talented.
thank you. Well, I've done, a couple of dozen interviews really about this. And people complain like, she's a singer, how come she never sings? So I've decided that periodically when I'm talking about it, I will throw in a little song, even though it's definitely not my best. I mean, if you got a recording video or studio and something in your ears. So essentially, after I would sing this song on stage, dressed up like a lady of the evening, I would leave the stage and I was ordered to go table to table, which each table had about 10 or 15 people. We're talking hundreds and hundreds of people. We're talking huge Las Vegas events. So I would go table to table and I was required to allow them to touch me, to touch my hair, to kiss me, literally kiss me. I was required to allow them to kiss me and hold me on their lap. And so I was constantly being fondled and French kissed by the rich and famous because, these are nightclubs. These people are at Moose Lodges, Elks Lodges, high-end restaurants, high-end hotels. And yeah, so my brother and I, we would perform and then we would come back because our signature family was Proud Mary. So my mother did that in Tina Turner style. So I can Tina Turner style with 2 kids on the stage. And so you can just imagine, why they would use kids. They're more like props than anything. So to put kids up there, everybody stops and they're like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. And then the fact that we could actually sing a song and belt a tune because we'd just been conditioned all our lives. They were just like, ah. So this would just, it created more targeting. And I've been really silent about the ways in which I was targeted. because people go like, are you paranoid? Like, really? You think you were targeted? You think they set out to find you? And I'm going to say resounding yes. So first of all, I come from a family of singers. So my mother sang. My aunt was an opera singer. She sang in 6 languages. My grandfather was he loved his American Indian heritage. We also had Irish heritage, and a host of others. You know, we were definitely Dutch mixture, whatever. But Irish and American Indian is high on the list, and we all sing. So my niece, my brother's daughter, she sings Broadway style, and she is stunning as well. And the weird thing is, I can't even take credit for my voice because I sound like my mom, and my niece sounds like us. So if you took the three of us and gave us the same song to sing, it would blow your mind because it would sound very similar, kind of shockingly. Yeah. So so where do I go from here? So let's say 7 or 8, I go back and forth. So where I was, my brother and I would go back to school, and we were living with social services families and family foster care. And where we were usually in situations where if we were in a social services situation, which was often because my brother would misbehave with his attention deficit and hyperactivity, so we get booted, and we'd end up in a welfare family where we were doing dishes, we were fondled, we were touched, we were groped. And at one point, we were even made to scrape wallpaper off the wall. So it's just like we lived our whole childhood not being loved. There's no baby pictures of us. There's no people that were just going, oh, these kids are wonderful. Let's snap pictures of them. No, that didn't exist. So I was born with a unique eye condition that people call central heterochromia. Now, I've only learned that terminology, say, in the last 10 years. So essentially, when I was a little girl, they would say, oh my gosh, she has those angel eyes. So my mafia family, that I became a Mafia Goddaughter. So I was literally betrothed to the head of the Kansas City Mafia. We called him Butch Sevilla, but his name was Carmen Sevilla. And to me, he will always be a savior in my life because I spent my entire childhood being molested and raped. And the only time in my childhood where I was not being molested and raped is when I was a Mafia Goddaughter. And so they brought us in because I was a singer, and my mother taught us how to dance very sexy, like in a figure 8 type of, shake your hips type of thing, dress in sexy clothing, think Brooke Shields, where we were literally paraded around like little hookers as children. And so they targeted me. So if you look at these eyes right now, you'll see the brown in there. And the thing is that my whole life, because they targeted me and I knew that they were fixated on my eyes and targeting me specifically for my eyes and my singing capabilities, that I would try to cover up my eyes. I've always thought that, oh my gosh, I just want to do away with these eyes because these people who molest children, the pedophiles in particular, they really like my eyes. And once they see my eyes, the sickos come out of the woodwork like you wouldn't believe. So they told me that I had angel eyes, that I could sing and I could dance, and that was a big deal, and that I was destined to be a star. And the whole time I remember thinking, like, I really don't want to be a star. I'm watching all these rich and famous people. They get drunk, they touch children, they're just kind of creepy. And my discernment was just really off the charts. Like I could see wickedness in people, and I would try to avoid them to no avail, obviously, because I was a child. But I kept thinking, as a child, I kept thinking that I should be able to somehow skirt this. So let's see here. At about my mother decided to stop doing gigs across the country. She was going to try to come home to Kansas City and be a real mom. She married a man who was an engineer for General Motors, and he had been a cop in Riverside, Missouri, a corrupt one at that. And when they got married, my stepdad set us down and said to my brother and I, listen, I don't like kids. He had a son, so he had a stepbrother too. So he had a son. He's like, look, I don't like kids. And if, as long as you guys stay out of my way, I'll stay out of your way. And Emery and I kind of looked at each other, and we were accustomed to being unloved and uncared for. So we're just like, ah, par for the course, no problema. So stepdad facilitated our mother to live in the Kansas City area while she was working for the Kansas City Mafia. So she became the main performer at a restaurant called Cascones in Kansas City, Missouri. And so here we were living in North Kansas City in a beautiful neighborhood, the nicest neighborhood I've ever lived in. And the Mafia was my godfather. I was betrothed to the Mafia's son. So he was my boyfriend, fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh grade. And it was just understood that I was being trained to be a demure person, a young woman who was very feminine and would allow men to touch me and grope me and be perfectly fine with it. And so that's part of what we now know as sex kitten MK Ultra programming. So I was constantly receiving these messages that this was what was expected of me when I would go out into these venues, and I was required to dress very sexy as a child and allow these people to touch me and grope me and molest me and hold on to me. So at one point, I got really tired of it, and I opted to stay in the car while my mom was doing a gig. And I think we were in New Mexico in the dead of winter. And my brother wanted to stay with me. And I ended up, we were in the car for so long, I got frostbite in my fingers because my mother would drink Jack and Coke and totally forget that she had children. So the one evening that I suffered frostbite where my fingers, and I still suffer from a condition because my fingers did not get enough oxygen for a long enough period of time that some of the nerve endings died. And I ended up finally getting out of the car to go into the establishment, because back then they would let kids into alcoholic places where they served alcohol as long as the parent was there. They would feed us like a Shirley Temple or a Rob Roy. And we're like, hey, we're freezing to death. But when my brother went into the restaurant and I accidentally slammed my hand in the car door. And so I slipped underneath off the curb, being, injured with my finger. I slammed my finger in the car door and slipped underneath the car. And my brother got distracted, and when he went into the restaurant, it took quite a while for them to find me. So I suffered some more. I ended up wetting myself, and then when my mother finally found me, I was beaten and shamed for embarrassing her. And so I had to like thaw out my hands and my body in a bathtub in a New Mexico hotel that I remember. But she was just born without the mothering. She just didn't have that instinct. And so we became the Mafia family in Kansas City, living there. So I ended up, benefiting by not being molested and raped. And I had a newspaper. I was working for a player it was the Kansas City Kings, was a basketball player. That was their team at that time. And so I got to babysit for one of their key players. So I was taught, like, you're going to be protected, you're going to be taken care of. Like, how else would I get a babysitting job, working for somebody that, played for the Kansas City Kings, an NBA player. So I to make money, I had this newspaper delivery in Little Italy, which was North Kansas City up the hill. And so there was a gentleman who would come by in his station wagon. He would drive me on my paper route every evening. But there was a winter, my mother, who drank Jack and Coke, as I mentioned, so she was a wide awake drunk. She was addicted to Valium, and she would go to multiple doctors because they didn't have like the computer system back then to cross-reference. So she had multiple doctors that were giving her Valium prescriptions. So she would just take a handful of Valium, and then she would sleep for days. I mean, she's like a dead person. And she was very lazy and kind of like just filthy. Like I was her servant. I had to clean up after her constantly. So I delivered the newspapers, and usually I had this guy who would drive me around. But it was a very cold night in February, and my mother got a call, and all of a sudden she said she was going to drive me on my paper route. And that was odd. That was very odd. It was unusual. It never happened before, and it didn't happen since. So I went up to Little Italy, and in the middle of the night, for those of you who don't know what it's like to have a paper route, they deliver the paper at 2 or 3 in the morning. You go in and you wrap it in plastic or rubber band, depending on whether there's rain or shine. And then you make sure that everybody's got the newspaper before 6 a.m. So for a child to be out at the age of 12 in the middle of the night, that was kind of weird too, but I was delivering to Little Italy. So this night, my mother decided that she was going to drive me, and it was a February in 1977, so there's snow on the ground. If you know Kansas City, it gets really cold, viciously cold, right? So that night, my mother took me there, and right there at my Mafia Godfather's home, or a couple of streets or a couple of houses down, there was a man named Johnny Amaro. He was my mom's boss at Cascones. We called him Johnny Green. You know, they don't use their real names. But I was on the scene at the time, and there was, at the end of the driveway was a pile of blood, and his head was shoved into his mailbox, and his body was in the trunk of his car. And so my mother had this huge Oldsmobile, and I don't know exactly what kind of car it was, but it was a big kind of Cadillac looking car like my mother's. And so I remember, you know, of course I was shocked. Of course I was stunned. And I was looking around, and there was all this, the police were on the scene, and there were lights on. And we were brought right to the scene, right where the tape was. And my mother grabbed me by the hand and said, and just kept looking at me, like, straighten up, because apparently I had a shocked look on my face. I don't know. But she had a sober look on her face. So she communicated to me that it was time for me to look sober and to stop looking shocked and to just stand there. So I was literally trained to be on the scene of mayhem with blood, a decapitation, witnessing it before my eyes while the police are there, and I'm just delivering newspapers, and my mother's talking to them about how she works for him. And that's why they let us on the scene. And so we left there, and we got into my mother's car, and she looked me straight in the eye, which was very rare for her because she didn't have that maternal instinct. And she said, "You are never to speak of this as long as I live, not even to your brother." So here I am, Irish twins, with my brother. He was my best friend. We were tossed from foster care to social services, many welfare homes that we ran away from together. And I was told to keep this secret from my brother. And that was contrary. That was like a shock to my life. And so I remember going home, and I didn't make it. I delivered newspapers for a little while longer, but I just couldn't make it. And then I went over to Dean's house, and who was the son of the mafia, my Mafia Godfather, and Carmen was downstairs, and he pulled me aside at the bottom of the stairs, and he looked me in the eye, and he said, "We put that behind us, right?" And I knew exactly what he was talking about. And he's like, he looked at me, and he gave me permission to have emotions for that moment. So I bawled. I just started bawling, and I looked into his arms you know, he was holding me, and I looked into his eyes, and while he was holding me, and then he said, as soon as I stopped bawling, which was a while, he said, "No, we're going to put this behind us, right?" And I said, "Okay." And I shoved it. I shoved it as far as I could. And I went upstairs, and I played foosball with my boyfriend, Dean. My brother, Emery, was there. And that was the last we spoke of it until about a year ago, before my mother died, or a year and a half ago, before my mother died. I think she knew she was going to die, and she told my oldest son everything about working for the mafia, about me being betrothed to the mafia's son, Dean Mantilla. And I got this call from my son going, "Mom." So I was like, whoa, wait a minute. So I thought I was supposed to keep this silent for as long as she lived. And she died November 21st, 2022, which I learned from my brother, who posted it on Twitter. So that's how I found out my mom died. So I'll go back to my mafia family. So there I was, experiencing this trauma and having to cope with it. So there was a test. I could tell you that that was a test. That was is she mafia wife material? That's what I came to understand. This is like, can she keep a secret? And the good news is I passed with flying colors. I stopped being shocked by trauma. I stopped being, I mean, here I'd witnessed a head being decapitated and shoved in a mailbox at 12. Blood, like I've never imagined that there could be that much blood in the snow, behind a car. It just, I mean, I will never, those are seared, those memories are seared into my brain, which that's how I deal with trauma, is I breathe it out, discharge it. So I went on with my life. And then my mother, she had a hysterectomy at the end of my 7th grade. And her pattern of using Jack and Coke and Valium to cope was complicated by the fact that she had a full-blown hysterectomy, and they gave her phenobarbital as a pain management or whatever. So she was drinking the alcohol, the Valium, and the phenobarbital, and she had basically a psychotic breakdown, which was not uncommon. My mom would have emotional, nervous breakdowns about once a year. So when I was even, let's say, 2nd grade, I was trying to manage her checkbook, trying to manage her money when she came to Kansas City and tried to live there for a short period of time. She couldn't keep the phone on. She couldn't keep the electricity on. So in the 2nd grade, I remember living in a pink house behind another pink house, and they couldn't keep the electricity on. So our freezer was a box out the window. Actually, that was our refrigerator, was a box out the window, and our freezer was a box out the front door that was sitting in the snow. And she always had people staying with us to help us cover the rent. And they were always people who were doing drugs, having sex orgies, and things of that nature that I was witnessing. So during that period of time was when I was molested by other family members. That's why I was molested by 5 different males before the age of 11. And that does not count the Hollywood people who molested, and I don't even count that. That was minor compared to the molestation that I experienced. So at the age of 7, my uncle started performing oral sex on me, and then he would sodomize my brother, and he would always keep us separate. So I didn't know that it was happening to my brother, and my brother didn't know that it was happening to me. So and of course, I have no repressed memories. Actually, a lot of my recovering survivors had a lot of repressed memories, but I didn't. And I went through therapy that I'll explain in a few minutes. But essentially what happened was my uncle would tickle us and get us calm so that we were very relaxed, tickle our arms and legs and help us feel relaxed. And then we had no choice. We knew what was coming. We knew that he was going to start molesting us. And so we had this code of silence, even this block between my brother and I, where we didn't discuss it with each other. We didn't discuss it with anyone. And our uncle would say, listen, you're not to speak of this. And if you do, I'm going to tell your mother what you've done. So he would literally perform oral sex on me, which is technically raping me at 7 or 8 years old. And I remember I was in the second grade, was going to John F. Kennedy Elementary, and he would say that I'm going to tell your mother what you did. So the blame the child was, real hardcore. And I bought it. I bought it hook, line, and sinker. I was just like, oh my gosh, this is my fault. Like, what did I do? Because it felt good when he tickled my arms and my legs. It felt good. I didn't, I could have run out of the house. I could have called the police. What they have done. So so we did. Actually, my brother and I, my mother was, we call her mommy. I call her mommy dearest because, of course, when you come home, just imagine you come home on Jack and Coke and you pop some Valium. What do you think is going to happen? Well, I'll tell you, she screams at us. She beat us bloody with a belt. She would hit me in the face with her stilettos. She would beat me with a hairbrush for not keeping my brother's room clean, or for not doing the dishes and getting them done, and for not ironing her clothes while she was gone. And then, of course, because of the Jack and the Coke and the Valium, the next day she wouldn't remember any of it. So when you're just like, Mom, you did this and that. What are you talking about? I'm just like, okay, I'm crazy. Why doesn't Mom remember what she did last night? So there's this okay, I imagined it all, I guess, and so she capitalized on that. And that since my brother was the wild one and would get into trouble, because I learned to be quiet, I learned to be docile, I learned to not get in the way and to cooperate with whatever was asked of me. But he had, hyperactive disorder, and so he would misbehave, and so then she would beat him bloody, and I had to watch. And it was very, very traumatic to watch my brother get beaten. So at one point, she took away all his clothing because he thought it was really clever. He turned his little dresser kitty corner, and he threw all his dirty laundry behind the dresser because you couldn't see it. And she came home and she realized that I had not done his laundry because I couldn't find it because he hid it behind his dresser. And of course, it was the girl's responsibility to do the cleaning and the laundry. And then she discovered that he hid it. So she confiscated all of his clothing and told him he was going to go to school in his underwear. Well, we didn't know whether she was going to make him follow through on that or not. So we both ran away. And we went to a step uncle who was no blood relation, but he was an uncle of the family, and he was within walking distance. It took us about an hour to get there. So we ran away to the uncle's house. And of course, when we got there, he immediately picked up the phone, called our mom, and she came and got us. So that didn't help. And then, of course, she beat the crap out of us for running away and embarrassing her. So the one thing we were not allowed to do was embarrass her. So at that same year, I stole a necklace from this little girlfriend that I had, which I'm not proud of, but I think it does happen. I think it's possible that a second grader does steal necklaces from their friends, but it was a capital event. Like, my mother held a dinner party and she got very, very drunk with her business partner at the time, a guy named Bill Tobin, and they got wasted drunk, and they held a trial in my living room while they were wasted drunk and found me guilty of stealing the necklace. And then they toppled the furniture in the living room, took away my clothes, and gave me a white t-shirt. And I spent 2 weeks living in a jail in my own living room. And every day my mother would walk me out on the sidewalk, up and down the sidewalk, and tell anyone we encountered that I was a thief. So I learned, being a good girl syndrome wasn't enough, because I stole a necklace, which was, I still remember it to this day. It was this little necklace that had like a little gold around it with this little red stone in it. And I love the color red, and I stole it. I don't know. I don't even remember why, but I paid the price, let me tell you. So after so that was second grade, but coming back to the end of the Mafia family. So my mother got this hysterectomy. She took her phenobarbital, and she got really, really wild. And apparently by the end of it, they had, like, there were 6 ambulances on Vivian Road in front of our house. So the fire trucks showed up, the ambulances showed up, the police showed up. My mother she had this huge incision, because back then they'd have to do a rather large incision to do a hysterectomy. So she had this huge incision in her under her, the lower part of her abdomen. And there were some scissors that she found, and she was stabbing herself with these scissors. And my brother tried to intervene and try to get her to stop stabbing herself because she ripped open her incision and she was bleeding everywhere. And she ended up stabbing my brother with the scissors. So the police and the paramedics, they would not approach her because she was just too dangerous. She was literally having a psychotic break. So I remember her at the top of the stairs. We were living in a townhouse that was at the end of the street. And she was bouncing on her bed, jumping up and down, and all the paramedics were all the way around her bed trying to figure out how to capture her without being stabbed. And so eventually they figured out how to pin her, and they got her down, and they ended up committing her to Osawatomie for a year. And so I ended up back in social services, but that's how I got out of the mafia. So my mafia family was so humiliated and embarrassed by my mother's antics that, and this is very common, by the way, of many of the Hollywood starlets. They have little breakdowns.
Message from hallway, you can't sign hi.
And they do their best. Sorry about that. They do their best to cover it up, but it was impossible to cover it up. It was, I thought I put my phones away. Sorry about that. So it was impossible to cover it. And so people ask me like, well, how did you, because most people who, become on the inside, they're coming on the inside, then how do they ever get out? Well, that's how we got out. You humiliate them, they want you out. So that was kind of a blessing in disguise. So we ended up back at family foster care. And through that period of time in family foster care, in my year of 14, I was, my uncle had gone away. He joined the Marine Corps. And then he had gotten out of the Marine Corps. He was dishonorably discharged for some odd particular reason. And so he came home, and I'm trying to turn my phone off here. And so he came home, and we were living in Platte City, Missouri at that point in time. And he brought us some cold duck, which, if you guys remember, it tastes like grape juice, but it had alcohol in it. So he fed cold duck to my brother and I. And we had dinner, and we were so happy to see our uncle. It had been quite a while since, being protected by the mafia, we hadn't been around him. And so we drank the cold duck, unfortunately, passed out in our beds. And I woke to my uncle on my back. He raped me anally and asphyxiated me, shoved my face down on the pillow, because the reason that they, in satanic ritual abuse, the reason that they sodomize children is because it's a horribly painful and traumatic event. And so he shoved my face on the pillow and asphyxiated me to keep me from screaming, because the process of having something put in something, shoved in your anus is horribly, horribly painful. So I didn't know it at that time, but after he finished with me, he also raped my brother that same night in his bedroom. So I was 14 and he was 15. And then, as luck would have it, there was a fire at that place, and our apartment suffered severe smoke damage. So we moved from there, and we ended up living back at my mom's mom, the evil grandma. And my dad's mom was a saint. She was a precious angel on the planet that literally raised over 30 children before she passed away. So she is the saint that saved me and brought me into the presence of Christ and kept me there. So I was very blessed to have someone.
Can I ask too about your father, Casey? Because his mom, it sounds like, his side of the family was like very gracious and loving towards you. Was he the same? Was he very loving, or did he sort of, maybe side with your mom and pushing you into some of these things and sort of turning a blind eye at these abusers who are around you?
I'm so glad you asked that question because my dad, he literally was just out of sight, out of mind. He abandoned us when we were 6 months and 18 months, and he went and made a new family. And so I have two half brothers. And the few times that we reached out to him, he was just too strapped to even send us $10. However, when I was 21, I found my father. We became friends. I forgave him for being a deadbeat dad. He apologized profusely. He loved God. And my 5 children absolutely adore him. He was like such a blessing to our lives, but he really was a deadbeat dad to me, but he was a wonderful grandfather. He was a good papa to my kids. So God basically did some work on his heart and brought him around. And so when I was 21, we started a healing process where he became my best friend. And we remained best friends until he passed away several years ago here in Southern California. So yeah, it was kind of beautiful, but interesting that, yeah, and that's really the message that I have is that I actually, this story might blow your mind, but I wrote, about 12 years ago, I wrote a forgiveness letter to my mother and to my uncle. And it took almost a year. I wrote it, but I didn't feel it. I did not feel the forgiveness. I was like trying. So I was doing all of my work. I was doing my therapy. I was praying. I was asking God, and it still took it took about 10 months, almost a year, for me to actually finish typing the letter and actually feel the forgiveness. And I wrote the letter and sent it to my mom and my uncle, and they both, I confirmed, received it, and neither responded at all. Which I use comedy. I have to laugh because that's another discharge for trauma. You know, if it's just absolutely insane, just laugh, because it's like, so God was like, all right, your heart is pure. You really truly forgave them. I came to an understanding where my mother was so broken, and she was also targeted by Satanists. I haven't even gotten there yet. So, and my uncle was actually raped in the basement of our church. So he was also targeted by Satanists who pretended to be Christians. So in order to go there, I have to come back. So do you have a question for me now, or do you want me to start back where?
Go
Okay.
ahead, go back. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I just wanted to ask about him since you didn't cover that relationship yet with your dad's side. So thank you so much for answering that.
No, praise God, because, you know, I was even thinking this morning that I wanted to mention that because my 5 sons absolutely adored their papa and continue to adore him. So, and I've always had to explain to them that, like, yes, I loved him. He was my best friend, but we had to get past the fact that he totally abandoned me. I mean, he knew my mom. My mom, just when they lived together, when they first got married as teenagers, literally, she put her head in the oven and tried to kill herself while they were together. So he knew. Yeah, he knew she was not well, and he knew her parents were not well. So that was what I held against him. So when I met him at 21, I said to him, I'm like, look, I'm going to tell you right now that if you make excuses for your deadbeat dad issues, and they are deep and wide, if you make excuses, that'll be the end of it. You and I will not be friends, because I mean, the two families were absolute, like, I don't know the specific details, but they lived in the same neighborhood throughout their childhood. They all knew each other. So I mean, this was not a secret. They knew. So his first statement to me was, you are absolutely correct, and I am so sorry, and I begged God for an opportunity to get to know you. And when he said that to me, I forgave him, and our friendship began in all earnest. So yeah, you won't see me. You'll see me talk about being raped, and I don't cry. But when I talk about forgiveness, you'll see that I cry, because that's straight from God, you know? So,
Sweet. Oh my goodness.
Okay. I'm gonna collect myself for a sec.
Yeah, no problem. Me too. Oh, that's so beautiful.
So back at 14, my uncle had raped us, and my brother and I were not talking to each other. And then um, there was a fire. We had to move from the smoke damage, and we were taken back to my mom's mom. And then the religious fanaticism kicked in again. So we were forced to get baptized at a Lutheran church against our will. My mom literally stayed up with the Bible and kept turning to pages that talked about how I had to get baptized right now, right now, right now. And so my brother and I, at some point, we kind of looked at each other like, we have to agree to get baptized like right now. At that point, we didn't feel it yet, but we have to agree to get baptized. Otherwise, we will never, ever get to go to sleep. So let's just get baptized and we can go to sleep, right? So so my mom, she was dating this guy who, not surprisingly, sold porn and sex toys. And he had, again, I was 14 and his son was 19, and they were from Minnesota. And I had a mad crush on him, but I didn't ask to get raped. So my mom went out with her boyfriend and left me with this boy who was 19, and he was sitting there watching pornography, and he raped me vaginally, which was statutory rape. And so that year, I was like, oh my gosh, I was so traumatized because I'd been violently raped by my uncle and then raped by this boy that I had this mad crush on who was 19, and I couldn't stop him. I couldn't control him. The only good thing that came out of it was that I found out that I was still a virgin because of the douches and the enemas. I thought maybe I had lost my virginity by the sex abuse from my grandmother, my evil grandmother. But I did find out that I lost my hymen, and it was so I was raped vaginally at that same year. So my mom, the irony was she wanted to get rid of us. So the Lutheran church where we got baptized, they paid for us to go to the Youth for Christ camp for a week. So my brother and I, in July of 1979, went to Youth for Christ camp, and on July 17th, 1979, we both gave our lives to Christ. And it was meaningful. It was beautiful. It was irrevocable and magical. My brother actually left there, and he was doing youth pastoring for a while. We ended up being moved to a different school. My mom moved to Prairie Village, Kansas. We ended up going to Shawnee Mission East. And he and I together would go to the school with our Bibles. We'd have Bible study in the morning. And then we petitioned the principal to let us play Christian music, the B lunch on Wednesdays. And so we were listening to Larry Norman, Randy Stonehill, and then Keith Green was coming on the scene. And he was killed in a plane crash. So that might be related to satanic stuff too. But anyway, so he and I were we were born again with Christ, and we were both filled with the Spirit, and we were on fire together. It was magical. I remember I was in the 10th grade, and he was in the 11th grade, and it was just a magical time to be alive, truly. And then from there, my mother had a nervous breakdown again. Her car got repossessed, and I was working 3 jobs. So let me just point out one of the reasons that NAMBLA, the North American Man-Boy Love Association, talks about sex before 8, before it's too late, is because the Tavistock Institute has done research where they have determined that if you can sexually traumatize a child before the age of 8, particularly with sodomy, that their neural pathways will be seared into the fight or flight. So that's how you create super soldiers. That's how you create assassins. That's how you create. So they've documented that we have up to 44 times visual acuity. We have enhanced stamina, enhanced ability, and a photographic memory. So everything that I've spoken to you about today is off the top of my head. I have all those memories, and those details are in my brain photographically, and my memory is just absolutely phenomenal. Now, backing up a little bit, when I was in the 1st grade, they determined, in addition to my angel eyes, the central heterochromia, they determined that I was testing in the 99th percentile. So, and this is when my mom was already working for the mafia, but I had not yet come into the mafia family where I was betrothed. So she was just working for them, and I knew of them, and I knew she worked for them, but I didn't have like, I wasn't in the family yet until we moved to North Kansas City. So they tested me, and they did like really expansive testing where they took not only my IQ, but they broke it down into segments, and they determined, and they told my mother specifically that I was mathematically brilliant, but spatially retarded. So to this day, if I go into like a gas station, I'm so spatially retarded that I will come out and go the wrong way. So my math aptitude was like a gift from God, just like the central heterochromia is a gift from God. So that what it does is it helps you to really plug in to God's discernment. So when I went to Youth for Christ camp, I went there to ask God to forgive me for being raped. Now, I speak of this with my survivors because we all have similar issues where we blame ourselves. We think as children, we were supposed to be able to negotiate something else, some other kind of outcome. And so I always tell people, it's like, yeah, I went to Youth for Christ camp at the ripe young age of 14, having been violently raped after being molested and raped throughout my childhood. I went there to ask Jesus to forgive me. And when I say that to some people, they're just like, wow, it really, I can't, I've had so many hundreds and hundreds of survivors that I always make it a point to bring that out, because people will say to me like, Casey, when you said that, you blamed yourself. Wow. You opened up, you gave me permission to confess that this happened to me, and I thought I was supposed to fix it, and I should have been able to, work something else out. Like, wow, how did that happen? Why didn't I not get out of there? Like, why did I drink the cold duck? Why did I stay home with my 19-year-old crush when my mom went out, and why didn't I run out of there when he started watching pornography before he raped me? Like, all these things just run through your mind. And so when I lay that out, most people, if you're, of sane mind, there's no way you would blame a child for that. So that's an important issue that I always want to bring up.
Yeah.
So
Can
yes.
I just say this real quick? I had my guest Carrie Olahe, she had said something like along the same lines but different. And she said, I had to learn that if, say, the cops happen to show up in that moment when I was being abused as a child, even if I was in the act of doing something, or if I was forced to harm an animal in a ritual, the cops wouldn't arrest a little kid. They would arrest the adults around the kid. They would never arrest the kid. They would understand that the kid is innocent, and I was like, that's a really good way to look at it, to look at it big picture and say, who would look at a child and say, oh, you're guilty for, being raped, or you're guilty for being forced to commit a crime? Like, nobody would. Everybody would feel so bad for that kid and say, oh my gosh, you were forced to do something that's horrible. But in your case, like you said, in hindsight, it's so easy to be like, oh my gosh, what could I have done better? How could I have gotten out of that? And it's all my fault especially because the abusers want you to feel like it's your fault. That's the whole point, you know?
Well, I will tell you this, that there are enough of us that are brainwashed through MK Ultra programming that we do blame the child. I'll give you a specific example. There was a 6-year-old little girl that was being molested underneath a desk, and a bunch of boys that videotaped it in Texas. So I was asked specifically to come speak to that issue by 3 people who were running for Congress, and we did a 6-hour radio show on it. And people would call in and say, was it consensual? And I was like, listen, how can you even suggest that a 6-year-old could consent to a sexual act? Like, right? So I'll land that issue.
Yep.
But okay, so at this home, I was 14, 15. I owned 3 cars. My brother had gone back to California, and spent a summer with our stepmom. with our two half brothers. And so I was there. So I got his car, and I had two other cars because it's a long story. I won't bore you with. But suffice it to say that I was introduced to hot rods at a very young age. And so I bought a 1964 Riviera with two 4-barrel carburetors. And it was a badass car, I'm just going to say. And it had a 425 Wildcat in it. And so my love for hot rods was born at the age of 15. I paid $210 for this car, but it had two air cleaners on it. It was like two full 4-barrel carburetors. That thing was loud and fast. But anyway, but the drive shaft was actually out on it. So my mother had a nervous breakdown. Her car got repossessed, and I was working 3 jobs, and I saved every penny. You know, when you have a childhood like mine, I don't spend money, I hoard it. So I was saving all my pennies, working 3 jobs, working constantly, going to school. My mother confiscated my money. At that point, I had $450. That was 40 years ago. So that's quite a bit of money for a kid who was 15 to have amassed. Okay. So she stole my $450, and she had a radio lawn show. So she called into this radio show, and she sold all of my personal belongings, sold 2 of my cars. She could not sell the Riviera because she couldn't find the title to it. I had placed the title, because adults can actually sign titles for minors, but I had placed the title on the shelf in my closet. And she was only 5 foot. My mom was like 4'11". She's this itty bitty thing, and she hated the fact that I was like 5'5", or 5'4.5". She's like, I can't believe you're taller than me. So I put it where she couldn't reach it, and she couldn't see it. So, but she was having a nervous breakdown because her car got repossessed, and so she kicked my brother and I out, and she had this screaming psychotic breakdown. She took a dining room chair and threw it through the window at the back of the dining room that was connected to the living room, dining room. And it broke through the window. And then she took our dog, this little dog named Babe. And it was just like a little black mutt. And she threw it through the window, and there was glass that was sticking out. So she murdered our dog.
Oh my God.
Right in front of us.
Oh.
Yeah. So we were both pretty upset. I just found, actually just yesterday, I was talking to a girlfriend of mine, and I just found a picture of my brother sleeping with that little dog. Her name was Babe. They're in Prairie Village, Kansas. So we went around the back of the house. She kicked us out of the house, and she was drunk. She was on pills, and she was drunk, and she was slurring her words and screaming. So she kicked us out. And so my brother and I, we went to the back of the house and tried to find the dog, and there was just a trail of blood. And it was so much blood, and there was nothing that we could do. So we ended up calling our cousin. We ended up getting to our cousin's house. We got there, and the police showed up and had us arrested as runaways. So we were taken to a really bad neighborhood with a welfare family, and we're talking the worst of the worst in the armpit of Kansas City, in Paseo area of Kansas City, Missouri. And so he and I kind of looked at each other at this point, like we had a sign language. We had a communication, my brother and I, we could communicate telepathically. And so it was just like, we knew that we weren't going to sleep. And whenever these people went to sleep, we were going to get out of that house and run away. And when we got out of the house, we were in the worst neighborhood that you could possibly be in Paseo. So we walked all night long. Like, here we are in the dark, 2 kids walking. And we made it to this one place where we found our phone, and we called our cousin, and she ended up coming to pick us up. But of course, that was where they had found us and called the police before and picked us up as runaways. So my cousin said, well, I have to take you back to your mom's. So they took us back to the house in Prairie Village, Kansas, and our mom was like hungover as all get out, and we were really upset because she had sold, in the radio show, she all my stuffed animals, my stereo, my bed, everything, she sold it so she could buy herself a new car. And she stole my $450 to buy herself a new car. And she bought herself a Buick Riviera 1973. I was so jealous because it had like the fastback, and I had like, mine was ugly, but it was fast. And so anyway, so she stole my money and bought herself a 73 Riviera. And so she was screaming and yelling, and I had one mission, and that was to get to my bedroom and get to the top of the closet so that I could get the title to my Riviera, because it was still sitting in front of the house. And I just wanted to get that title so that she couldn't sell it, because I knew my cousin could fix the drive shaft and I'd have a car to drive. So that was my mission. I was on a mission. I got in, got the title, and right about the time I came out of my bedroom and got back to the front door, Kansas City has cold weather, so there's a dual door situation. You have your front door and then a screen door. And the front door was open, but the screen door was kind of it was closed. But she saw me leaving. I got the title of my car, but shoved it in my clothes so she wouldn't know. And I was leaving out the front door, and she, even at 4'11", she managed to get her foot in the middle of the small of my back and kicked me out the front door. And I landed in a police officer's arms. And I was like, now do you believe us? We're not runaways. So,
Whoa.
yeah. So they ended up taking us to a family of a friend of a family. And we stayed there for a couple of days. And my other cousins and I mean, here I was 15 years old, but I looked older than I was. So my cousin and he signed as my boyfriend, pretend to be boyfriend cousin. And we pretended that we were together. And I got an apartment at 15 across the hall from my other cousin. So my brother moved in with me for a while, but rent came due and he didn't have a job. And so I let him stay with me for a while, but he ended up finding a family that he could stay with. So I got my own apartment at 15. I ended up working for this pension company in Overland Park, Kansas, in Corporate Woods at 17. And I had health insurance, so I got into therapy. So I did all this therapy. And finally, my therapist put me in group therapy with all of these women that had been sexually traumatized. And she said, you are graduated because you're like running my group therapy. So she says, you need to go start your own support group because you're graduated. Get out of here. You've done your work. So what she did is that she made sure that I didn't have any repressed memories. So I told her everything that happened. And then my uncle had disappeared by this. He'd faked his own death and disappeared. And so he was living down in Florida. It couldn't be found. And so here I was in therapy. And so she was teaching me how to reparent my inner child using Christ-centered meditation so that whenever I would get triggered, I could discharge the emotion, as you've witnessed me do here a couple of times. So she taught me these tools on deep breathing exercises and ways to manage my trauma and to focus on the feeling that I'm having today. So if I get cut off in traffic or my boss yells at me, like what am I really upset about? So you take that back in time, and I would find an instance where my mother was beating my brother or I was being raped. And so you get to the core issues through reparenting yourself by being traumatized emotionally and using Christ-centered meditation to find the core of that issue and healing yourself. So reincorporating the little girl in me with the adult girl that was capable and could protect her now, because here I was 17 years old living on my own, and I'm like, there's nobody. So I signed myself back into this high school, and I was singing in the top chorus group. I was in the top chorus group. They had a top hat song and dance group. So I was getting straight A's, and I was in this group. And then the school found out that I had no legal guardians, that I had forged my mom's signature to put myself back in school. And my brother gave up. He's just like, look, I don't have a mom, I don't have a dad. I'm just going to go do my own thing. And so I signed myself back into school, but then they discovered that I didn't have a legal guardian. So they came to me and they said, hey, sorry, but the law doesn't allow us to let you go to school here. So they made me leave. So my junior year of high school, with my only friends, because I went back to the school where my good grandmother in her school district, and where I had some friends, because I moved around 18 times and oftentimes ended up back in that school district. So I tried to finish there and they would not let me. So one thing that I did leave out was that they had done these tests and they were trying to get me to skip a couple of grades because I had in the first grade, I tested so high on their standardized testing. And then they did the IQ test where they determined that I was mathematically brilliant, but spatially retarded. So they tried to get me to move up 2 grades, but it was agreed that that would be too devastating for my brother, who was already my Irish twin. He was my big brother. I already had to parent him and my mother, so they agreed to hold me back. So that's why my mom had no problems having us miss so much school, because, and that's very common with the Hollywood kids, is that they a lot of times they don't get to go to school, so they would just test us when we would get back to school. So I was my brother's teacher. I taught him how to do fractions, and like using a pizza and a chocolate bar, like how to do fractions and things like that. So there's a lot of resentment when your little sister is put in your charge that we had, from our childhood. So so we're at the point now where I got married at 18, and I had escaped my childhood, and I got into the therapy, and I graduated from therapy. And so for the last 29 years, I've been providing 100% free support to survivors of sexual trauma on my own. And it's just been a gift from God. It's just, my survivors are my life, because my family of origin disowned me because when they found my uncle, he was kiting checks down in Florida. So they picked him up, and dragged him back to Platte County, Missouri, which was a godsend, because it was literally across the street from where he raped my brother and I when we were 14 and 15 years old. So talk about like God's justice, right? So at the time I was living in Florida with my sons. I got married at 18. I got married again at 29. So I was living down in Florida. I came up to confront him in the jail, because the one thing I did not understand is, how could you perform oral sex on me and then not finish? So I thought, and so did my therapist, she thought that there was some repressed memory, like I was being raped and I didn't know it. So it was very important for me to confront him. So I found him in the jail. I got there bright and early because they only had like 2 visitors per day. And I wanted to make sure that I got to visit with him. And I sat down, and, he always pretended that I was the love of his life. And, he loved me so much, while he's molesting me. And he loved my brother so much. And, that's some things that pedophiles do. So I sat down across the glass from him, picked up a yellow telephone, and I said, I just want to know one thing. How many times did you rape me? Because in my mind, being penetrated orally wasn't rape. So I was talking about the sodomy. And he's like, it was just the one time, I swear to God. And he started telling me about this woman in the neighborhood where my mom and my dad both lived after having moved from St. Louis. And that she, in the basement of their church, that they would have this holy, praise God, Pentecostal, even speaking in tongues, everything, which I believe in. But then they would go in the basement and do these horrible things. So he was molested and raped in the basement of his church by a neighborhood woman. And I told him, thank you for being honest. I left. And then I went to my grandmother's house, my evil grandma. And they had, landline phones back then. So he called while I was there visiting my evil grandma, my good grandpa, the American Indian. And he was always good to me. And he called me Papa's baby doll. And he was one of the few males that I felt love from, who did not try to touch me or in any inappropriate ways. But he didn't stand up against his wife. He enabled her. And so she was on the phone up in the bedroom talking to my uncle in jail, you call collect. So I went into the kitchen, and back then they had those landline phones where you could unscrew the mouthpiece and take the little metal part out. And so I was listening in, and I heard talking to my grandma, and I heard her say, well, if she wants to bring charges against you, then I'm going to testify against her and say how she was crawl all over your lap like a little snake. And I was like, I put the metal back in, screwed it back on so they would know that I heard what they just said, slammed the phone down. I told my grandfather, I'm like, Grandma just said this. I'm out of here. And I got in my car and I went over to my dad's family. And I told them that my uncle had molested and raped me. Now you have to understand, my brother and I have not still at this point, I'm like 26 years old and he and I have not had a conversation that it happened to him too. So I'm just telling my story. So I went to my dad's mom, my good grandma, and told her, and everybody in the family was just like, oh my gosh, we just knew your Uncle Toby was horrible. We knew that he was bad news and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, why every Christmas and Thanksgiving did you guys send Emery and I over to them to be raped for the holidays? I mean, literally, we was like, my brother and I, we got to the point where we would get like the measles, the mumps, or the flu every holiday because we were so exhausted from being kicked out of the good side of the family and sent over to the satanic side to be raped for the holidays. So I was just like, okay, so, but the bottom line is that they were just giving lip service. They didn't actually believe me. So I left, and every year I'd gone there for Thanksgiving and Christmas. And when I left there, my mom had a nervous breakdown and blamed me. Like, why did I have to come stir up the pot and bring all this? I was coming there to confront him. I had the help of my therapist. And to her, she was just like, I mean, how many people have an opportunity to actually confront their rapist? Like, that is the gold for a survivor, to be able to confront your rapist. So my therapist was so happy for me and I was so happy for me. But as a result, my family of origin stopped talking to me completely. So I was completely cast out of my family of origin because I was no longer invited to Kansas City for Thanksgivings or Christmas. And there was all the whispers, she's damaged goods, there's something wrong with her. I mean, my mom was insane, so my whole childhood they kept waiting for me to become like her because my brother had more of the addictive chemistry, and so I had already endured that. And then I got to the point where I was like, okay, look, I don't know what else I have to do to show you that I have good chemistry, that I'm organized, that I'm responsible, that I'm a good human being, that I love God. I'm raising my kids in Florida. We're having a wonderful life. Okay. So finally, back in 2016, my uncle confessed well, let me back up a little bit. About a year later, my brother came out to our cousins like, hey, by the way, she's telling the truth. It happened to me too. And that's really hard for a boy to do, to admit that they've been raped by their uncle. That was really, really hard. And so I give him props for that. I mean, he has put it in his comedy. He has a CD that he talks openly about being raped by our uncle. So I'm not giving away any secrets. I'm not disclosing anything he hasn't disclosed at this point. So, and he was much more, attacked than I was when you consider the difference between being sodomized repeatedly from 7 or 8 till 15 versus me just once. So, he had a lot more to overcome. And he also had my mom's chemistry and he wanted to be rich and famous in Hollywood and he followed in her footsteps. So, that's another chapter, but before I get into that chapter, I wanted to see if you had any specific questions at this point.
I want you to keep going actually, because you are on a roll and you've answered a lot of the questions actually that I wrote down. So keep going, girl.
Okay, so I love my brother more than anything in the world, but he hates me. Now he says he hates me because I wouldn't let him borrow my albums when we were teenagers. And that's true. I wouldn't let him borrow my albums because you know how boys are, they scratch albums. And we had Larry Norman and Randy Stonehill and Keith Green albums, which were very Christian rock. And so, yeah, that much is true. But the truth is that his wife left him because she had an issue with his porn addiction. And I was married in Florida, and my husband had addiction issues, and it involved pornography. So he and I were working on our, I was working with survivors and codependency issues because obviously I had to like deal with like enabling all these dysfunctional adults around me. So very codependent. So I had to, like, the first book that I read in my recovery was Toxic Parents by Susan Forward, and then Codependent No More by Melody Beatty. So those were my core books that I started my recovery on. So I was doing my recovery, and my second husband, I married at 18, a horrible alcoholic. And then my second marriage was at the age of 29, and he also was an alcoholic, but he wanted to get better. So he got into recovery. He had addictions with pornography and alcohol and gambling and you name it. He had my mom's chemistry. Not surprising that I would seek and find someone very similar to my mom, even with all the therapy. But he was working on his issues. So my brother came to visit. He was editing the film, The Aristocrats, which, if you know about it, well, let me tell you. First, he got into comedy in Kansas City for Stanford and Sons. He started almost 40 years ago. It's been like 39 years. He started doing stand-up comedy, and I was always on the front row. Like, I was his prop girl. I'd go sit on the front row when he'd go to open mic night, and he tried with props and things like that, which did not go over. He said for the first 6 months, I was the only one clapping. But he's very, very talented, very talented. Like, he's hysterically funny and always was, just very, very talented. So I was his number one fan, and I helped him break into comedy. And of course, he moved back to LA like me, and has done very well for himself. So at that juncture, he was editing The Aristocrats, which went all the way to Sundance in 2005. And I have, visuals here. The Aristocrats. So this was actually the Blockbuster cover on it, but it's 100 comedians telling one very dirty joke with Paul Provenza and Penn Jillette. And it was Whoopi Goldberg, Gilbert Gottfried, Bob Saget, George Carlin, who was a good friend of my brother's, all telling the most disgusting joke. So if you have not looked it up, do yourself a favor and book note, go look up Gilbert Gottfried's version of The Aristocrats, because each of them would do a bit, that's what they call it, where you go into a talent scout's office and you pitch your act. And your act had to involve a family, had to be disgusting, dirty. And so, not surprisingly, most of them came out with incestuous, bestiality, rape of children, and try to make it funny. And they did. They actually made it funny. So it was absolutely, I'm going to show you this. So this is my brother, Emery, edited by Paul Provenza and Emery. So this went all the way to Sundance in 2005. And I'm going to show you his CD too. This is the cover of his CD called Purveyor of Filth. And then notice the Illuminati symbolism here. One eye. Okay. Psychotic ramblings of a chronic masturbator. And there's two bits on there that's specific. One is gay pup and rape. So those are the ones where he exposes that we were raped by our uncle. So he disclosed it to the whole world. Okay. And then he edited this film. So everybody, in order to get a full picture, you really, really need to understand. So I'm just going to give you a couple little snippets, like Gilbert Gottfried. In summary, he's passed away now. So you can, I can tell his story where he gets up there, and as raw as he is, and Robin Williams, Whoopi Goldberg, all of them did their bits on this. So 100 of our most beloved comedians all participated in this. And then they come in, and so they, just to give you an idea, they coined a phrase called space docking, where a father defecates into his daughter's birth canal. That's saying it nicely. And then Sarah Silverman, she inserted herself as one of the children that was being raped in the act. And then, so this Gilbert Godfrey goes in and he's like, so the mom and the dad, they come in with the dog and the daughter and the son, and they all are having sex with each other, which they don't say it that way. They're just like effing each other and fisting each other. And there's blood and feces and urine and blah, blah, blah. Blood, feces, urine, satanic ritual abuse. Anybody? Look it up. And so they're celebrating this. And then he's like, Gilbert Godfrey's like, wow, you might say like, oh, why didn't the talent scout stop him right there and say, hey, I'm witnessing bestiality and incest and rape of children? And these comedians are going like, oh, that was a whole different story. And there's all these comedians that are laughing. So my brother is in my home with my 5 sons editing this film. So he had the raw footage. I gave him his own spare bedroom and begged him to like, please don't expose any of my children to this, because this is like, wow. So I try to be supportive. I went to the Hollywood red carpet event. Okay. I went to the Hollywood Pantages. I rented a gown. It was so expensive. It was so high end with Paul Provenza, Penn Jillette, Penn and Teller, and all of these, right, full red carpet event, and they showcased it. It made it all the way to Sundance for 2005. So my brother shows up. He's polyamorous. He's got an award-winning atheist podcast called, I think, Ardent Atheist, and then another one called Skeptically Yours. He openly worships Satan, named his cat Lucifer. Okay. And we're all just pretending that this is funny. This is still just a joke. And I will tell you that, like, he could get my kids like front row seats to the Jimmy Kimmel show. Well, back then he got me green room access to the filming of Friends. So I was literally live on the set watching the participants and all of those people that we've been watching for 20 years, hailing Satan in the green room, like a football, putting their fists together going, hail Satan. And it was like, oh, ha, ha, ha. I stayed at my brother's apartment once in Arcadia, and he's like, well, when you want to call the cat in, I'm like, he named his cat Lucifer. I'm not going to go outside and go, call the cat. I'm like, Luce. So I kept trying to keep, don't be a fuddy-duddy. Come on, get with the program, be fun. So, when you have a brother who's a professional comedian, I was always the butt of his joke. So I was just like, okay, I'll try. But man, that's when it hit. So he shows up, he's polyamorous, and 2 of his women show up wearing dog collars with spikes on them. And this is his Tuesday girl, and this is his Friday girl. Well, he told my kids, all 5 of them, when we came to visit him in LA once. I actually put all 5 of my kids on a plane, which I would never do again. Oh my gosh, that was horrible. And we came to visit Uncle Emery, and he explained to them that he's polyamorous and that 2 of his girlfriends are HIV positive. One of them has AIDS because she's had 3 AIDS-related illnesses. And he's talking about participating in orgies. And like, it's just like, what? Seriously? So yeah, that was when I decided that it's probably not a good idea to have my kids around my brother. Which, of course, when you take 5 teenage boys and tell them they can't see their Uncle Emery, you know how good that went. Didn't go well. Okay. So that's kind of where that went. So that's when we knew that my brother and I had really taken different paths, because he and his wife came to Florida while he was editing that film that literally depicts satanic ritual abuse that was being applauded throughout Hollywood by all of our favorite comedians. And she saw that my husband and I were discussing pornography addiction and getting past it. And she confronted him and said, honey, I'm not comfortable. It makes me feel degraded and I don't like it. And they ended up splitting up, and he never forgave me. He blames me for the end of his marriage. So those 2 elements together, him, me serving God. So while I was in Florida, I was singing at a mega church called Discovery Church. So I was one of the lead singers at a very large mega church. And so I took my talent and served God with it. And he went back to Hollywood and continues to serve Satan with it. Now, the one time we discussed it in a cafe in LA, he very condescendingly across the table patted me on the hand like this. said, okay, sissy, he calls me sissy. Sissy, if you need therapy for what happened to us, that's fine, but I don't. And so I was like, oh, okay. So it kind of like we became more and more estranged at that point because I had children to consider. And but since then, like he because of his pornography addiction, and when I left my ex-husband, they had that bond, that connection. So the two of them together have worked to really slant my kids in another direction. But that's a whole different podcast, and I'll leave that alone because that's my kids' business because they're adults now. And so I try not to speak to that. I'm respectful of their choices, but suffice it to say that prayers are welcome over my children because they have been told that me taking them to church was child abuse. And by not letting them have, by discouraging pornography and not letting them have as many orgasms with as many women as possible is me depriving them, so-called cock blocking them, and that really we're here to have as much joy and passion as we can. So my brother is very open about now he says he's bisexual and even gay. I've heard him refer to himself as. Participates in orgies. He's openly polyamorous and gives props to Satan on his Twitter page, which I noticed he took down after I put it on a couple of podcasts, but I screenshotted him. So he can't really deny it. So he's got me blocked on his Twitter page. But yeah, a year ago, I was allowed back on Twitter because I was just booted off. I don't even know why I was booted off of Twitter. They didn't give me a reason. And so I had heard that they were letting us back on Twitter for some reason. They were opening it back up to people they had suspended for no good reason. So I got back on, and there I was, November 21st, 2022, looking at my brother. I was actually looking for myself. I looked up my name, and I found my brother attacking me on Twitter. So, because we have different political views, and so he was attacking me for, number one, I'm a Christian, and he attacks me for being a Christian, and we have different political views. So he was on there attacking me, but apparently someone of my political persuasion was in there arguing with him, and he thought it was me. So that's how I found myself on my brother's Twitter page. And then it was literally the day after I got back on Twitter that I got onto his Twitter because I was basically stalking him on Twitter because I didn't follow him. I was just go on there to see what he was posting. And he said that Darlene Helton, our mother, had died on November 21st, 2022. So it's like I wasn't going to get a phone call or nothing. So over the last 10 years, I've always texted him because his birthday's Christmas Day and mine's Christmas Eve. And I always text him on his birthday and tell him how much I love him. And he always texts back and says, "Don't ever talk to me again." Yeah. Stay away from me. And any opportunity on his podcast or on his award-winning podcast, the times that he did speak of me, he would speak ill of me because of my politics, because I was a Christian, and just saying I was a overprotective mom, things like that. And I was just like, he abandoned his daughter. I found her when she was 17 and actually reunited them. I gave her $10,000. I found her in Kansas City where he had abandoned her. He had told me that she had a new dad and that he wanted me to just let her have her new family because she had a mom and dad situation. She was well protected and all this kind of stuff, but it wasn't true. She was left there in the same home, just really scraping to get by. I think her mom had worked 2, fast food jobs just to keep food on the table, and she lived with her grandparents. And so I found out that she's a very gifted singer. And so she and I kind of hit it off because we were singing together, and I introduced her to her dad, my brother. And initially he thanked me profusely for making the connection. And I gave her $400 a month until it added up to $10,000, and told her, I said, I want you to have an opportunity to have an apartment and to get your life started. And $400 a month back then would have paid for apartment in Kansas City. many years ago. That was what, 30 years ago. So, or 25 years ago. I don't know. I lose track of time. So she, I deposited $400 a month. And when it reached 10,000, I stopped giving her any money, and she stopped speaking to me because at that point she was of his persuasion that they needed to just discard me. So she locked me out of her life too. And so that was kind of sad, but so here I am, just really working to help survivors. And so I don't know. I mean, I have a lot more things that I could talk about, but the one thing that I just want to wrap into this conversation is that in 29 years, I have counseled a lot of people, men and women. I have a lot of survivors. Like it's known that 1 in 3 girls are molested before the age of 18 and 1 in 4 boys. And in particular, men in the Middle East are raped as a rite of passage. They call it bachi bazi, where they are raped by their uncles and cousins when they reach puberty. So this is something that we all need to become aware of. And of course, I've been a witness to a lot of sexual trauma, people who've been raped and trafficked by very rich and famous people, which, I mean, who else to understand this and believe them but me? And then for the last 12 years, well, I moved back 12 years ago to Newport Beach, where my oldest son was born 35 years ago at Hoke Hospital, just a stone's throw away from me. And I was born in Orange, by the way. I was a California baby. And so I came back here 12 years ago, and it shouldn't surprise anyone that most of my survivors that I've been helping are trafficking victims. So a lot of women from Panama, Honduras in particular, also Russian brides, Romanian, so women from the Ukraine. So I have an actual client who told me that 10 years ago that Ukraine was crawling with what they call the red light district. They actually have, you know, where the hookers go. They also have a pink and blue district where you can go rape little girls and little boys. So this is something that I've been painfully aware of my entire life, but I've just been on the sidelines trying to keep it to myself because even my, you know, California family, they would really prefer if I don't talk about the work that I do with molestation and rape victims. But the irony is that they find out anyway, because I'm all over Facebook and Instagram and things like that. So the very family that keeps telling me to be silent about it, it's their loved ones, their nieces, their nephews, their brothers and sisters that end up calling me behind their back and say, hey, you know, my girlfriend was raped or she went on a date and can you help her? And my girl, she's being beat up by her boyfriend and the kids, she's got bipolar disease. And now the dad who's abusive is going to get custody of these kids. And so can you help them? So the family always calls me when they need free legal services. Because for 26 years, I have owned my own business and I write federal court documents for pensions to split up the pensions when people get divorced. So I use this partnership that I have with family law attorneys to help women mostly women, get restraining orders against their abusers and their traffickers. But unfortunately, what I witness a lot is that they end up finding another trafficker and another abuser, or they end up going back to those situations. So I do the best that I can to help people. But I think this would be a really good time to ask if you have any questions, because the last segment that I want to talk about is targeting.
That's so funny. I was just literally going to ask you about that. So let's get into that, because I know that was something that you wanted to make a point about talking about. And it's something that I'm noticing people are starting to talk about. I've had a couple of people on my podcast, more than a couple actually now, but it's something that, you know, people are becoming more comfortable talking about because there's people starting to do it. So I would love to add your piece to this puzzle, because it is like, there's no type of abuse that's acceptable at all. And I'm not trying to like put abuse in categories. However, when you have a person that's physically abusing you, you have a chance at somehow maybe getting justice for that, or at least calling them out. You have something in a person that you can say, this is this person is responsible. It's different when it's targeting because you don't get to see the abuser a lot of times. It's very elusive. And so it's very easy to be written off when there's not a person you can point a finger at or a name you can name. People want to say that you're making up your abuse and that
Yep.
you have to be crazy. And that is simply not the case, and we
Mhm.
know like, technology of what we know exists versus what actually exists is night and day. There's a lot more advanced stuff that most of us can't even comprehend, and I'd love to hear your piece of the story because it really adds on and validates the other stories that have been told.
Yeah. I have to be really, really honest too, that I have been completely silent about the ways that I was targeted because I literally thought, man, if you open your mouth and you tell people about this, they are going to think that you are insane. So it took me a long time to, I mean, other than with my survivors, it has taken me a really long time to get to the point where I would even talk about this. So this is where I'm going to bring you back to things that I've been talking about. So we brought up the central heterochromia,
Yeah.
and remember that these people in Hollywood, when they would see in person, like you can't really tell on the video, but that's why I wanted you to have that picture where you could actually pull it up. Because when people in Hollywood see that you have central heterochromia eyes, when you see that that dark circle is the brown around there. So you have a totally central heterochromia is where you have different colors regardless of whether the lighting, how the lighting is. So my eyes are like this 24/7, and you see like, so you have the brown, the burst of brown, and then right behind that you see the gold, and then there's a green burst, and then there's a really, really dark blue ring. Now, even this photograph, it took 80 photographs literally to get that picture that the other one that was actually mine. So it took 80 attempts because you see like the shadowing. It's really, really hard to actually photograph it. So it took 80 attempts to even get something that clear. So when I was a kid, they would literally fall over themselves, like almost to the point where once they noticed that I had central heterochromia eyes, that was it. They would attach themselves to me for the evening. They would tell me that they were going to make me rich and famous. They were going to make me, I was going to be on stage with my mom. I was going to be uh, the cat's meow. I mean, there was, and it was weird to me because I was targeted specifically for this eye condition, and I was supposed to be like, oh, I was supposed to feel grateful, you know, but it didn't make me feel grateful. It actually made me feel absolutely terrified. When they would come at me, I was just like, oh my God, here comes another one. Here comes another one. Okay. So I got to the point where I would wear sunglasses all the time, and because I didn't want people to see it. And as recently as 2 years ago, a friend of mine said, he was talking about my eyes, and he equated it. He said, oh, you're one of those kids that shows up from a spaceship and knocks on people's door and goes into their house to murder them. I was like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. So yeah. So in Hollywood, they absolutely target people with central heterochromia. So any eye issues like this, what it does is it shows, and the science of it is that it shows that you have extra cones in your eyes. Okay, so how many times have you heard the eyes are the window to the soul? So when you have like these extra cones to have these multiple color bursts, then they're all throughout Hollywood. But in Hindu religions, they are the seers, they are the prophets, they are the ones, they're known to have supernatural discernment. But the evildoers will actually label us as witches and warlocks, or and when I was a kid, here I was, an American Indian and Irish. So you remember Cher did that song Half Breed? So I was like trying to avoid discussing the fact that I was a half breed with this, eye condition that caused me to be targeted by the rich and famous. So I would try to cover it up. And even in my 20s, I was trying to figure out how to get contact lenses to have just one eye color. But then I finally gave up because the only choice you have is to have those opaque contact lenses that make you look like you're a demon. And that was like, exactly, like, look at that. Like, wow. So the it's so rare. It's so rare. Only 1% of the human population have central heterochromia. They say it's like 1 in 10,000 in the United States. But so there's more of us here in the US, but it's only 1% of the population on planet Earth. So I didn't know what they called it. I didn't know it was called central heterochromia. I knew I was gifted, but my IQ was only 139. So they expected it to be like mental level, but it was only 139. But it was because I was mathematically brilliant, but spatially retarded. So on the average, it brought my average down. So to me, it was a gift because it would take me out of the gifted category. Because in a gifted category, I would humiliate my brother. They would move me two grades ahead because I was always, I was like basically way ahead of the teacher most of the time. And so the fact that I could sing, and not just sing, but my mother, she made sure that my diaphragm was so well developed listening to Aretha Franklin and Dionne Warwick that I had like this, they call me a power singer. So when I do sing, it's kind of shocking because people don't expect that this little girl, this little blonde girl with 5'4", opens up her mouth and just puts the kind of volume in the room that I'm capable of putting in the room. So that's always been a shock, but that started when I was a child. So that got me targeted. So when it ended up happening is I got out of the mafia from the, essentially I got out of their purview where they were constantly viewing me when my mother had that nervous breakdown when I went into the 8th grade. But then what they kept contact. They kept track of me. Now, that's what I'm feeling when I say that. People are like, all right, you're crazy. You're paranoid. Because someone actually said to me, someone in my family that I love dearly said to me like, hey, who hasn't raped you? Yeah.
Oh my
And
God.
yeah, they've said that if I had more faith, that I must have been the sins of the father. They like to use that I must my childhood as a result. I must have had some horrible sins in my past life, and so on and so forth. So it's absolutely insane. So I was targeted specifically. So I know they were keeping track of me because out of the blue, I got a scholarship to John Casablanca's modeling agency when I was 18. So my godfather, I was working 3 jobs. I got a ticket on my car, my 64 Riviera, because I had a short in the taillight. So I paid $210 for the car. And I had a short in the taillights, and they wanted $600 to to follow the wire so that they could figure out what the short was. So the bottom line is I had like 4 or 5 tickets. I'd get pulled over. Every time I got on the freeway, I'd get pulled over. And so I had these tickets racking up, and I was doing my best with 3 jobs to pay the rent. So I didn't pay the ticket. So I end up with a bench warrant. And then I get pulled over by this cop in Lenexa, Kansas, right next to 75th Street, where they had this, like it was a dance club where back then you could drink beer, 3-2 beer at 18. So you could get into a bar at 18. And so I was of that generation. And so these cops were targeting young girls that would leave this one particular restaurant at 75th Street and get on I-35. And he pulled me over. I was going south, and he pulled me over for my taillights were flickering. And he said, you got a bench warrant. And I'm like, oh, crud. So I told him I had no mom, no dad, that I was just going to school, that I was, had my own apartment. I was living in Olathe with my girlfriend, Lori, who was my roommate when I was 17. And he said, well, I got to take you in. You got a bench warrant. So he drives the patrol car, leaves my car on the side of the freeway, although there they call them highways in California. So leaves my car there, takes me to the basement of the Lenexa, Kansas Police Department, and I go in through the basement. He makes me get undressed, bend over, and trigger warning, sorry to say this, but I was that time of the month. He made me remove my tampon, made me bend over, pull my everything open, the flashlight, and got a good look. Didn't touch me, thank God. But then he had this little problem. Like, there's nobody to sign her out. And there's evidence if you actually book her. So he let me go out the back door with no evidence that I was ever detained. So I walked back to my car and got to my car on the freeway, drove home, and my roommate, Lori, told her everything that happened. And she was just like up with me. Like, I was crying in the bathtub. I was just like, oh my God, I thought I escaped this. And here I am, these dirty cops and blah, blah, blah. And so my girlfriend, Lori, she was just like, she was up with me in the bathtub. And the next day, she was so incensed that she went into the police department and she told my story as though it happened to her. And apparently this particular police officer had multiple girls that he'd been doing this to. He'd been targeting girls that would leave this I think it was Pogo's. I can't remember exactly now. So would leave this dance bar who after the age of 18, you could get in there. And so he'd had several reports on him. So she got him fired. Okay. So here I am telling this story for many, many years, and everybody going like, who hasn't raped you? And oh my God, Casey, you've got all these bizarre stories about what happened to you. How could that possibly be? Even my best girlfriend of like 6 years, she's just like, she got drunk one night. She's just like, Casey, I don't know. Really? You were molested by 5 different males before the age of 11? Like, I was like, oh my God, she's my best girlfriend.
Yeah.
And so I began to realize like people don't believe me. So when my uncle killed himself, it was a great day. So he apparently was molesting his biological granddaughter, and he confessed to his daughter that he'd been raping her, and she had already started to show signs of chemical imbalance, misbehavior, and stuff like that because she was being molested and raped. And his daughter rightly said, I'm going to throw your butt in jail, Dad. And so he got out of the car. Apparently they were talking in the car, got out of the car, walked home, went to his bedroom, got a gun and shot himself. And I'm not clear whether he shot himself in the head or the chest. Honestly, I don't care. It was a great day for me because this is a man that I had forgiven. I had written a forgiveness letter, which he ignored. And I was clean. My heart was clean. God had cured me, had healed me completely. And so when my aunt called me and she said, from Kansas City, and said, yeah, your Uncle Toby shot himself after confessing. My brother got on his Twitter and said, my sister and I, we thought that when we confronted our uncle and told the whole family that he raped us, that he would stop. And blah, blah, blah. And this is the only time that I spoke to my brother. This was in 2016. I actually interacted with him on Twitter. And I said, I beg your pardon, but I was very specific. I told you that pedophiles cannot stop molesting children. I had no expectations that he would stop. And that's the whole reason that I came to the family to disclose that he raped us. I didn't know about you. I just came to tell my story, was because I knew that there was no way he would stop. It was very unlikely that he would be able to stop. And so, and that of course just angered him more at me. But suffice it to say that his birthday, my Uncle Toby, the rapist's birthday, was March 9th. So every year, despite all my healing and my trauma and helping everyone out and not having any emotional devastation, every year on March 9th, I would literally just take the day off, cry all day. So that year, I was free. March 9th is a day of celebration. It's one of my favorite days now. So there was that validation and also evidence of my targeting. And then my girlfriend, Lori, from Kansas City, moved to California, showed up one day. We reconnected on Facebook. She came to brunch and she sat there and told my adult children, yeah, I was with your mom when the Lenexa police officer strip strip searched her illegally in the basement of the police department, and I'm the one that got him fired. So she showed up to validate me. Praise God. And then when my aunt called to say that my uncle had killed himself, she said, I got to tell you that we didn't really believe you. I said, yeah, no, duh. He didn't speak to me for 5 years, and I was devastated and I was crushed. And I had to go through extra therapy because of it. And so that was very, very empowering. So I'm at the point now where my children got manipulated by my mom, who hated me from the day I stepped onto the planet. She literally hated me. She never loved me, and she told me regularly that I was there to serve her. And she criticized me constantly. Like when she never was a grandmother to my kids, but when she did show up periodically, I had her psychiatrically evaluated, and the therapist sat her down and took all these stories, particularly the one about her keeping me in a jail for 2 weeks for stealing a little red necklace. And she asked my mom, like, what were you thinking? And my mom made all kinds of excuses for it. And so she's just like, so this therapist, who happened to be my ex-husband's therapist, she sat my husband and I down, and she's like, look, this woman is so toxic that you've got 5 kids and you can't be with 5 kids. So one of you, if you're going to have her visit you at all, one of you must be with her at all times, because you just never know what kind of toxicity she will express, because she's the type, she might actually slip them drugs, just something horrible. And despite that, my ex-husband did not heed that warning. And when we divorced, he encouraged relationships with my mother, who I left in Florida, and my adult children. So she spent the last 13 years of her life just saying horrible things about me, saying I was an overprotective, controlling mother, and that I lied about her, that I was a compulsive liar, and all of the things that I said about being abused were untrue. But she would always say, I knew I was a terrible mother. Just get over it. So I'm like, that's the best apology you're going to get, is I know I was a terrible mother. And so then she targeted my kids, and particularly my oldest son, who's been wheelchair bound since he was 16 for muscular dystrophy. She really targeted him. So when she passed away a year ago, I praise God for that too. So her soul kind of floated around me for 3 days, and I felt horribly sad and depressed. And I don't suffer from depression, which I never have. Thank God. I don't have that chemistry, but she was with me for 3 days. And I remember being able to forgive her even more. And again, because I was like, man, if you felt this depressed, like, no wonder you were such a horrible mom. So the Lord showed me, gave me like 72 hours in her spiritual presence to totally forgive her for her depressive issues. And so yeah, it's been a really, really interesting year, because like, it's just been like, in the year since she passed away, I've been able to really examine things. So she disclosed about the mafia and their targeting of us. So I'm going to go back. So they targeted me specifically for a John Casablancas modeling agency scholarship. Okay. So at that time I was 18, I'm 58 now. So 40 years ago, it was worth $3,000. So I don't know what that would be in today's dollars, but a lot. So all of a sudden my good grandma says, you won a scholarship. And I was like, oh, great. So yeah, you really need to go be a model. You got to go be a model, blah, blah, blah. So I went through their education. I did the runway, and I put on so much makeup. I didn't know my own name. I couldn't even identify myself. Graduated, and they said, you know what? They told me 6 months before I was like, to do this one gig, they said, L'Oreal and Helene Curtis, they want your eyes. They absolutely have your eyes. They want your eyes. And they had literally taken hundreds and hundreds of pictures of up close and personal of just my eyeball. You can even tell it was my eye. And they said L'Oreal wanted me, and it was interesting because I ended up wearing L'Oreal mascara. I had to wear L'Oreal mascara. They wanted me. They said, you're going to be the billboard of L'Oreal mascara and Helene Curtis, because I had great hair I'm 58 years old. I can still grow a lot of hair. And so because of my hair and my eyes, I was going to be rich and famous for L'Oreal and Helene Curtis. So they sent me out on my gig. I was 18 and I had to go to Indianapolis, Indiana. I showed up, had to entertain these executives. They got wasted drunk and they kept groping me and they kept grabbing me. And so I finally excused myself to go to the bathroom because I couldn't keep these guys off me. I mean, it wasn't like one of those things where I could just, say, oh, I have to go home now or whatever. I mean, there was no escaping these two guys. So I literally pretended like I had to go to the bathroom, escaped. And I thought, just like the Playboy models that I have counseled over these 29 years who believed that they would be protected within the organization, but they were subjected to orgies and rapes and all kinds of stuff, that was their agenda. I was an escort. So I left, drove my own car, thank God, back from Indianapolis, back to Kansas City, went to John Casablanca's agency in the morning. And they said, you have offended two of our biggest clients. We own your portfolio. You're fired. So they took my education that was likely funded by my Mafia godfather. Oh, I didn't finish the story about the police officer. This one's very, very important. So with the bench warrant, I had to go down. Once the police officer told me that I had this bench warrant, I was like, I'm not gonna drive my car and get pulled over again and have this happen. So I went down and I wanted to face it. So in order to face this bench warrant, I had to go turn myself in to the police and show up and go in and say, I'm guilty, or to say, just tell them, I couldn't afford the tickets. Sorry, judge. So I went in, I turned myself in, and I was underage and no way to get out. So after about 5 days, they're like, look, sorry, it doesn't matter what you confess to or whatever, we can't let you out. So 5 days in jail, I was literally suicidal, trying to figure out how to hang myself with my sheet. I called my mom. She was living up in the suburb of New York in Connecticut, and she called Butch Savella. And within 24 hours, I had a letter of recommendation from the chief of police and the chief of fire in Kansas City. I was brought before the judge first thing in the morning. And it was true, I had straight A's. It was true that I had 3 jobs and I was this excellent student and hardworking and all of this kind of thing. But just ask the question, how is it that the head of the Kansas City crime family, that is to this day, if you Google it, it comes up, the head of the Kansas City crime family, how is it that they are so well connected that they elicit a letter of recommendation from the chief of police and chief of fire? So, all I'm saying, they're connected, okay? It's a club, it's a big club, and we ain't in it. So, yeah, so I was targeted at 18. Then I moved to California and I was working for this pension company, and they wanted me to get my stockbroker's license because here I am with this excellent math aptitude. So most stockbrokers have Series 6 licenses. You have to have a heavy math aptitude to do Series 7 because that's stock options, puts and calls, like, what we've been witnessing now is being manipulated across the board, like Robinhood, that whole thing that was going on. So here I am with this excellent math aptitude. So I get my Series 7 stockbroker's license in 1989. So I'm a new mom. I had a newborn in 1988, and I became a stockbroker in 1989. And the first thing they did, don't tell me I'm paranoid, because it's a little too coincidental. First thing they did is ask me to go do an internship with Merrill Lynch. So I go do an internship with Merrill Lynch, and they sit me down at a desk with a Rolodex and say, call these people and offer them the stock issue of the day. And I said, well, I just passed a test that says that that's a violation of federal law, that I first have to assess their risk tolerance, get their age, and determine, are they 65? Are they ready to retire? I mean, can they play with the market on what this new issue is? It's like, you're asking me to violate federal law. And so they're like, yeah, but you're going to make $150,000 and just do it. And I was like, so here I am. I've taken the Series 7. My broker dealer is Titan Capital in Tustin, California. My job is contingent on me having this Series 7 license. And in keeping it, they sponsored me. And they told me, if I'm going to keep this internship, that I have to break the law. I have to literally break federal law and put myself in a situation where I go to federal prison. And I'm like, no. So I go over to Dean Witter, and they pulled the same thing. So I went back to this company that I was working for, was Bankers Pension Services in Irvine, California. And I'm like, look, I quit. I'm not doing this. I moved to Hawaii, and I worked for a company called Hicks Pension Services, and I started doing pension. I started working with that, partnered with a Japanese guy, because Hawaii's, they have a lot of Japanese that live there. And I partnered with this guy named Brian Kurihara, and I used my stockbroker's license in Honolulu. So they set traps for me and offered me a lot of money. So here I was in Honolulu, and I could tell you I love living in Honolulu. My oldest son lived there with me. And Emery came out and did some gigs out there. He did a gig with Rosie O'Donnell. Then, we went to a lot of his gigs. He did gigs with Seinfeld, Sam Kinison. I told you he was good friends with George Carlin. And Rosie O'Donnell came to Honolulu and did a gig with my brother. So here I was living in Honolulu doing these gigs. So I go to work. I go back to Florida after I left Honolulu. And my ex was actually serving in the Gulf War in Kuwait. And so there I am in Florida, and waiting for him to get back. And so I was working for the two largest law firms in the state of Florida, Holland and Knight and Ackerman Centerfit. And somebody came along out of the blue after 3 years and offered me a job being the exclusive person to write these federal court documents when people get divorced for Lockheed Martin. That's a coincidence, right? That's not targeted at all, right? So I've been in business for 26 years now, but if I had not been offered that gig from Lockheed Martin, I wouldn't have been able to leave these law firm positions that were, Holden and Knight and Ackerman Centerfit, the number 1 and number 2 law firms in the state of Florida at that time. So anyway, I don't know how I've managed to escape, except, well, I do know. I mean, Jesus Christ is my Lord and Savior. And every time I get presented with a choice, I get on my knees and I ask God what to do. So they offered me, they said, you can make, $170,000, come on over to Rockland, Maryland. And we got a job here for you. And I was just like, no, thank you. I'm going to be a mom. So I turned down that gig, and, that was very tempting, to have that. So I can tell you that they haven't quit. They haven't given up. So there's an issue going on right now that involves litigation with local police departments. Because when I came here 12 years ago, I presented evidence from one of my victims of corruption within the Newport Beach Police Department. And they ended up, there were some depositions. I dated a police officer, and there were some depositions that got avoided because the corrupt police officers that were literally involved with prostitution and drugs in the city of Newport Beach, they quit. They stepped down. And so those individuals, so my evidence did not have to come forward in that particular case. However, the city of Newport Beach Police Department continued to target me for the last 12 years, despite my literally owning an actuarial firm where I work in tandem with family law attorneys, 650 of them for 26 years. They harassed me. They call me an RF, which is rat fink, because my boyfriend testified against them. He was in a motorcycle accident, and he was no longer able to be a motorcycle cop in the city of Newport Beach. So he had nothing to lose. So he testified against them. And that's the whole reason that these corrupt police officers had to step down. So as we speak right now, I have ongoing litigation with the city of Newport Beach. That's an ongoing issue with the corruption of the police. So it just so happens, and I'm self-represented, and they've got like 8 lawyers battling me, and the corruption is beyond comprehension. So yeah, the targeting has not stopped, not even a little bit.
Oh my gosh. It's, I think people have this misconception a lot of times that if the abuse stops as a child and now you heal as an adult, that really your only obstacles are to continue healing and that you're free of everything. And it doesn't work that way in most cases. Like if you're wanted for something and if you have something valuable, and you had so many different, from being able to sing to having the central heterochromia to who your family relations were, right? Like they want those types of people to stay in the network. They don't want you going astray and doing your own thing and making your own families and, disconnecting. And it's very odd that they try so hard. Like, even though so many years can go by, decades, and that you don't come back, they still, for some reason, will always try to lure you in, and that's hard
Yeah.
for people to understand that, that there's people that devote their whole lives and yours to trying to get you to come back into the network and keeping tabs on you and almost like making sure that you're coloring between the lines, and not deviating, not sharing secrets, not, doing anything that would go against what they want to expose them, and it's horrifying to think about that there's always like almost, somebody breathing down your neck in a sense, no matter what you do, that there's always people that are sort of luring you in. And I'm sure that that's really confusing when opportunities present themselves or new relationships, like you meet new people. For most people, that's just, part of life. You don't really have to think twice about it. If you get offered a job, you take it or you don't, but you don't have to sit there and be like, is this a setup? If a new person comes in your life, most people don't have to think about that. Is this a honeypot of some kind that somebody from the network is trying to befriend and manipulate me and like handle me? But that's something that you have to think about with everything that you do and with your family and with anything new that presents itself, and so it's so validating hearing you say that, because there's so many people that feel unheard that go through that. And it does sound crazy if it's not put into context and if it's not explained fully, but
Yeah.
it makes perfect sense when you hear it in the context of, why wouldn't somebody want you? Like, you're so beautiful, you're so bright, you do have all these gifts, you have things that make you individual and unique that not a lot of people have. Why wouldn't people desire to have you back? And you realize like how brilliant, how amazing, how just incredible, survivors are. And like you see why they were the chosen ones, in that network. But like what we have to take back is that God chose those things for you ultimately and wants you to use them in the world for something beautiful, and so being able to sort of shift that, which you've done, 3 decades of helping survivors, like what a slap in the face to these people who thought that they could take you down and keep you controlled within their network, that now you're taking your experiences and helping people with it. Like you're setting people free with what you've learned. And they probably hate it, they don't want that. They want everybody to stay in these networks,
Yeah.
so I really appreciate you sharing, because not only does it validate, but it shows just how powerful it is when you take back what they exploit and like how you can turn that around to make the world a better place, which you're doing.
Yeah. Yeah. I got my godfather's permission to leave Kansas City. At 21, I went to see Dean, and I spent the day with him, and our connection was just as solid as ever. And he's like, you got to come, you got to say goodbye to Dad. And so I spent 12 hours at a restaurant that his mom owned, and just hanging out there. And I waited for Butch to come in, and he came in, and he asked me. I said I wanted to move back to California, and he said that he would support me to do that, but he wanted to know one thing, because I was getting divorced from my first husband. He said, "Did he ever hit you?" Which he had, because he was a severe alcoholic. And I immediately saw that body in the trunk and that head in the mailbox, and I was like, no, he he was just a drunk. I just want to go back home to California, and I just wanted to come say goodbye to you and tell you that you were always good to me, and I love you, and I appreciate you. And here I am talking to the head of the Kansas City Mafia, family, crime family. But it's crazy to say that I had no mom or dad that was loving on me, but my mafia dad did love on me, and he never tried to molest me or anything. So, but someone recently said to me in a room, because I do a lot of spaces and things like that, tell my story, but somebody recently said to me, because as one final note of targeting, I have 5 sons and all 5 of them are male. And the chances of that happening are about 3%. So if you flip a coin, you can look it up, Google it. What's the chances of having 5 kids the same sex? It's 3%. Well, I'm a carrier of Emery-Dreifuss muscular dystrophy. I want you to hear that again. Emery-Dreifuss muscular dystrophy, and it's spelled just like my last name, E-M-E-R-Y. I'm a carrier. So I have a defibrillating pacemaker. You can kind of see it wiggling around there. It keeps me alive. I've had one since 2005. I've flatlined 36 times, but I've been clinically dead 8 times, where I was in a sustained VTAC or VFib. And all 5 of my kids have Emery-Dreifuss muscular dystrophy. So half of my kids should have been male or female, and half of my kids should have got the X chromosome that had the muscular dystrophy or the X chromosome that didn't. So I bring up, this is, the privacy of my kids. So I don't want to get into too much detail, but I will tell you that the chances of flipping a coin and getting 10 in a row, because that's what it takes to get 5 of them have the X chromosome that has the muscular dystrophy on it. Because I'm strong as an ox, so I definitely don't have the muscular aspect of the disease. But it has almost killed me several times from the heart defect that goes with it. But my kids suffer from the muscular aspects. My oldest one, as I mentioned, has been in a wheelchair since he was 16. But there's 2 issues that are very important here. We know that they've been putting embryonic kidney cells in Pepsi and Coca-Cola for a long time, and my mom was a Pepsi junkie, and that little girls are born with all the eggs they're ever going to have. And so the chances of me having all 5 boys are 3%, and the chances of all 5 of them having the Emery-Dreifuss muscular dystrophy is 1 in 1,024. So my eye condition is 1% of the planet. And my 5 sons, so I have 3 brothers, 5 sons, and 2 grandsons, not a female in sight. And I was abandoned by my mother. And up until she died at 77, she wanted nothing to do with me, and made it very clear that she doesn't like me or love me. And so I joke around and go, yeah, I have a face that not even my mother loves. So, you got to laugh with me when because it's painful, but yeah. And the fact that we're Christmas and Christmas Eve babies, that has something to do with targeting too, because you know a little bit about the goats, and you know a little bit about, I was born in the year of the dragon. That also adds to the targeting. So I'm hitting on all cylinders for targeting. And, for people who don't know about these things, I might just be dropping like a, a little mint on the pillow, but I encourage you guys to look those things up. Because it is really odd that we're Irish twins, born Christmas Eve, Christmas Day. He has green eyes, which is rare in and of itself. Me with the central hyperchromia. I have 5 sons. All 5 of them have muscular dystrophy. And somebody just recently said to me, in a space, okay, in a space. So they're following me. And they said, if you had not left your mafia family, there is a cure for Emery-Dreifuss muscular dystrophy. It's called regenokine. And you could go down to Mexico if you only had $10 million if you hadn't turned away from your mafia family.
Gosh. Wow. And so I have to ask you, you knowingly had a target on your back. You have ever since you were a child. What made you decide to speak out? Because that had to have been sort of a scary thing to do when, even without speaking out, you're being targeted. So
my doctors diagnosed me with heart failure and said I had, they can interrogate my defibrillator and say, you're in full-blown heart failure. Your fluid levels in your heart are in the heart failure range. So you're going to die in 5 years anyway. So my doctors who prescribed lisinopril, which is derived from Brazilian pit viper venom, and I stopped taking it for that reason once I did the research on it. I've been getting better, but according to my doctors, it would be a medical miracle for me to live 5 years. So for me, it was like, go speak out, go speak your truth, and help as many survivors as you possibly can before you die. And also, I have been in sustained VTAC and VFib, and I can produce medical records to that effect that I have sustained VTAC and VFib. Look it up. It's death. It's asystole. And I've got some near-death experiences that would be a whole other podcast. Pretty amazing stuff. So my faith in God is unshakable. It is absolutely unshakable. I am convinced, and my oldest son and I, who has suffered horribly in his life with this muscular dystrophy, being in a wheelchair, he's got a rod in his back and his arms and his neck. And he's very, very crippled, but a radiologist or a pathologist called us when they did a muscle biopsy, when they still could not determine exactly what type of muscular dystrophy it was, because I didn't know what my kids had until 9/11, the day that my son was going in for his defibrillator pacemaker surgery on 9/11 and saw the second plane fly in. We didn't know that it was Emery-Dreifuss muscular dystrophy, and I'd already given birth to 5 boys. So then I had to watch each of them start to develop muscle weakness. But a pathologist told me, he's like, look, I have tested this muscle every which way since till sundown, and the dystrophin levels are normal. His CPK levels are slightly, abnormal, but still not enough to indicate the kind of muscle issues that we have in your oldest son. And he goes, but I did find a carnitine deficiency, which is only something you get if you eat red meat. So I started having red meat every day, meatballs, you name it. I got real creative with the red meat meals. And my other 4 kids they're not crippled like that. In fact, if you were to meet them, they're young, beautiful, wonderful young men that don't look like they have muscular dystrophy at all. So my oldest son suffered the most because I was living here in California, feeding him fish and chicken and avoiding red meat because that's what they told us to do. So maybe that food pyramid might be a little
Just a little bit off. Oh my gosh. Wow. Oh my gosh, Casey.
So there's reason to believe that they may have, with the whole douche and enema practice, they may have done that to my mom with the Pepsi and the Coke and her horrible diet and addictive chemistry. If there was something healthy, she wouldn't eat it. And she was addicted to everything. Sugar, fat, nicotine, caffeine, you name it. She was, chain smoked her whole life. And so there was a lot of targeting, a lot of evidence. And the more survivors I meet, the more similarities I find out. So, but like I said, I don't tell a lot of people that because they're like, all right, you're just paranoid. So call me paranoid.
Nope, you're not. And anybody watching this show, we know that you're telling the truth and understand that this is a protocol. This is part of the playbook. We hear it all the time in different variations from these testimonies. So people here will love and accept you and understand that. And I know I do, and that was something that for me too, it was hard to accept. And it wasn't because I didn't believe it. It went against everything that I had ever learned. It was so hard for me to say, like, how can that happen? And nobody's held accountable, and to so many people. But when you see how carefully crafted things are and how deliberate and how much time they take to plan these things. So it does sound crazy when you finally whistleblow, just like satanic ritual abuse, right? They make things so crazy that when you actually speak it sounds crazy, but it's not. Like I said, when you take the time to actually listen to a whole testimony instead of just a little bit, when you hear somebody say like, oh, I'm gang stalked and I have all these people following me, if that's all that you hear, it sounds crazy. But if you hear the entire story, all of a sudden it makes sense and it puts a light bulb in people's heads. So to me, it's been really important to explore that, not only because it challenged me, but because the more I hear it 100,000,000% makes sense. And I can't go back to the way that I was thinking, where it was like, gosh, that sounds, it sounds I don't even want to say crazy because I always believed it. It just, to me, it was so new, just like satanic ritual abuse. It was so hard for my mind to wrap around it, but it's undeniable when you hear it in the context of how you put it, and you realize all these elements put in place to essentially, hold you captive and keep you in control and keep eyes on you. And
Yeah.
like I said, who wouldn't want to? Like you had so much to offer them. They
Yeah.
wanted you for all of those things. They wanted to exploit you for all those things. And, they know how powerful you are to go use those things against them, which you've done, you
Yeah.
know? So it's incredible. Your courage is amazing, Casey. And you taking all these risks and helping people so selflessly for so many years, not going out and boasting about it, doing it quietly on the side, and helping people, knowing that you're shouldering this huge story and this big weight, and instead you give that to God and say, here, you hold this so I can hold other people's stories and hold space for them. It
Yeah.
almost like brings tears to my eyes to think about just how beautiful that journey is that you've taken, and like how much you've suffered because of it, even after you were able to get out, just all the different things that are still happening to this day to you.
Hmm. I know my oldest son and we're just like, look, we had to have sat down with God and said, look, we're going in hot. We know we're going to suffer a lot of abuse, but we have to amass a lot of experience in order to be here for such a time as this, because everyone's waking up to widespread corruption in all areas. And people will say to me like, okay, so you're just fixated on Hollywood and you hate all pedophiles and you're just obsessed with pedophiles and stuff. And I'm like, oh my gosh, wait until they find out that pedophilia is at the crux of all the corruption in every their heads are going to pop off. I'm just like, all I have to do is I have to live long enough to be here to support people to get through this.
So yeah, people who deny it, they're going to get slapped in the face when the dam breaks and just everything comes out. Like that's going to be really, really hard for people who chose to look away. And that's so
Yep.
crazy. Like you hate all pedophiles. What are you supposed to do? Like just love the fact that you were abused by, so many people throughout your life. You're supposed to just, that's totally fine and normal. I'm just not going to do anything about that. Like what a crazy thing to say to people.
Yes. And even as a Christian, I'm okay with the death penalty for pedophilia. I absolutely am. They are. I know too many pedophiles. I've seen them up close and personal, and trust me. In order to do that to a child, they have sold their soul to the devil long ago. And I'm sorry. I have no empathy and no sympathy for them. I've just seen too much. Too much. I mean, if God can heal them, great. But I don't want them around me ever.
Yes, and a lot of them aren't turning to God and trying to heal. They're doing things behind the scenes and they're not going to stop. And so you might have gotten free, but how many other children were abused after you? And then more people step in to take their place, and it's just this perpetual cycle. So it's like, yeah, to me it's like forgiveness and loving people and having compassion is so big for me, but I also understand on the other end that there's some people that they're not going to stop no matter how much slack you give them, no matter how many times you forgive them, no matter how many chances you give them. Even people that get in trouble and serve time in jail and then get out and then go and do it again, like there does have to be a consequence for people who are willing, like you, to step out of it and say, I'm going to break everything. Like this stops with me. Other people on my podcast, like there's a choice. Everybody has a choice, and I think it's all of our hopes, just like how your dad, ended up redeeming himself and coming back and completely, apologizing to you, taking responsibility. Yeah, maybe it was too little too late for him to be your father because you were already an adult at that time, but you got to actually experience that redemption and pass it on to your kids. Your kids got to have a stability that you didn't. And that's really beautiful that you get to give them. And so it's a blessing that he was able to turn a corner and kind of unwind and re-engineer his damage and try to make up for it for the rest of his life, but most of them don't do that. That's not common, and
No.
so do we want these abusers just out there, and we're just excusing it? Like at some point, yeah, we do have to put our foot down and, say, what's the answer here? These people aren't stopping. Like, we need to expose them and put a stop to it somehow. Either they need to stop it or we need to stop them,
Yeah. Yes, definitely. I think, I don't know exactly how it happened, but it is widespread and it is pervasive. Like, I'm here in Newport Beach, and like even like 2 weekends ago, we were sitting at brunch and we were watching these young women get onto a yacht with these fat old guys that, and it was just, and we're just like, now my friends, it's funny because they really don't, nobody really likes to talk about it. Nobody ever wants to talk about it. So it's like, that's one of the things I love about my survivors. They love to talk about it too. So it's like we have somebody, but it's like, so now my friends are looking around like, oh, those girls are probably not going to make it out of there very good. Because yeah, I had a girl a couple weeks ago. She went out on a yacht and she came back in the hole where the orange life jackets were, like, all moldy and everything. And so, yeah, they had raped her in every orifice, and they had rented the boat through a corporate gathering. And there were so many people there that they couldn't possibly determine who it was. And so, yeah, some guy with a yacht comes by and her life's forever changed. And that's huge here. I mean, I've got the bay in my backyard and the ocean in my front yard, and yeah, these people are, this seems to be a hub. In fact, even Scott McKay was saying, there's a huge hub in Newport Beach, California. So I'm in a hotbed.
I believe it. Yes. All of California, I feel like it's a major hub, especially being right on the ocean and next to so many major highways, and the accessibility there, and the weather's pretty fair. There's not really a bad time of year to have these things happen either.
Yep.
So I think it's great that you're trying to expose some of that locally too, so people can be aware. It's puzzle pieces, it helps validate other people's stories whenever they can sigh a breath of relief and say, oh my gosh, Casey understands me. Like, she's speaking my language. I knew that, and she's validating it.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, because people just they don't want to look about it. They don't want to look at it, and they don't want to talk about it. And that's what I tell people. It's like, we have to get to the point where we can talk about it. If you want it to stop, we all have to talk.
100%, girl.
Yeah.
And I admire you so much for your courage to come out and talk. And these are really hard things. You divulged a lot of really personal information. It's not easy to talk about. It's not easy to listen to. But in order for us to change something, like, we really do have to understand the depravity, the vileness of what actually happens. And I think that only happens, unfortunately, when we hear really bad things, and hear things that are extremely uncomfortable to listen to. And it's sad that most of society turns away, because if we all came together today, we could eradicate this now and put a stop to it, but so many people, it's too much for them. And it's sad, because it's like, gosh, you didn't have to live through it. All we're asking you to do is listen. But it gives me hope that more and more people are, there's more and more podcasts coming up that are, featuring these stories and survivors. There's more survivors writing books and starting projects and, doing things creatively to contribute something that gives their pain purpose, that they can give back to people, that outlasts the abuse that they went through, that outlasts time, and I'm so grateful that you're out here contributing to that too. Because I think, for generations to come, the information that you're giving, people are going to continue learning from and discovering, and relating to, and being like, oh, that's me too. Like, I was funneled through that Hollywood system and I get it. I was trafficked in Missouri, or whatever it is, you're helping give a voice to, and targeting, can't forget that one. Like, you're giving a voice to so many people who are sitting there silently struggling, or who maybe didn't make it out of these things alive and didn't get to actually share ever. So I want to honor you for that, Casey. You're so brave and just so beautiful, and you're such a ray of sunshine. Literally, nobody would ever know that you went through anything hard if they just met you. Your energy is just absolutely incredible, and you're so beautiful and, oh my goodness, talented and eloquent whenever you speak. You're brilliant. So I'm so happy that you're out here talking, because you're helping normalize a lot of the stuff that can get in people's heads as being too much to comprehend, and you're
Right.
able to explain it in a way that's very easy to understand, in a sense of hearing your whole testimony and being like, oh, I see how that, how she can be targeted. I see how Hollywood is nefarious. I see all these different things now that I didn't see. So I really
Yeah.
appreciate you coming on and sharing.
Well, you are such a gorgeous human being inside and out. And I feel so blessed to finally meet you and to be a part of your podcast. So just thank you so much for being the brave one to really help share these stories of targeting, because we have been suffering alone. I mean, I've been doing this for 29 years and I've been keeping all this targeting stuff to myself because nobody would really believe me.
We believe you, and it's an honor that you came on here and shared that. I know you haven't before, besides personally. So that's, like I said, you're giving a lot of people voices, and people are going to really appreciate hearing that from you. And I'd love
Thank
for you
you.
to talk about your projects. You just started a Rumble channel. I'd love for you to tell people about where you're at on social media, if there's anything that you're working on that you want people to know, how they can keep up with you, keep in touch with you, because I want everybody to go follow your journey.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I've been on Facebook and Instagram, but they've got me so shadow banned there. I don't even bother for the most part. But I did get back on X, so I'm a Casey Sunshine Pro Singer is my word, but Kailea Christian is at Kailea Christian, which is Kailea Christian, Christian. It's actually Kailea Christiana, but I couldn't get the A in there. So it's Kailea Christian, which is even better because, I really, really want people to know that I serve God and I'm here because I'm a follower of Christ. And that's my website there, sexualtraumaandrecovery.com. So this is where you can go to see my toll-free number there. You call me and I will schedule a time for us to speak, and we can speak privately, just you and me. It's free 100%. This is back when I was in a band there in the middle. And so there's pictures of me, there's information about my personal life, pictures of me at the beach. And there's also my personal email there so that you can reach out to me and speak to me directly. Same email that Emma has for me. I check it every day. And you can get into our group counseling because I have a StreamYard so that we can do like a Zoom like we're doing now, or a StreamYard. And that's my email and that's my toll-free number. And you just press 0 on the pound sign to get trauma counseling, and it's free. So for people who say like, oh, I don't have the money, I never charge. And for people who say, oh, I owe you, no, you will never ever owe me. Now, at the top of my Twitter page, I do have, as somebody pointed out who was attacking me recently, that there is you can tip me. I have a tip button, although I don't even think it's active right now. I've never received not a single penny yet. So see, it looks like it's not even active. Like my tip button isn't even active. But there at the top of my Twitter is a 36-minute interview that I did specifically regarding Satanic Hollywood, celebrity molestation, adrenochrome, and being a Mafia Goddaughter. So that's a 36-minute video that I did that went all over Europe to an audience with Sasha Stone, to an audience of up to 57 million. So now I have survivors all over the world, including Tokyo and Vietnam. And anybody who speaks English can give me a call, because I speak some Spanish and some sign language. But other than that, it's mostly English. So that's about it. So I did just recently start a Rumble channel, which is caseysunshine.net is my website that I have not yet put my videos on. So I named my Rumble channel caseysunshine.net. And so it's got some of my interviews. You see my interview that I did with Carrie Cassidy and Boiling Point Live and Tara Crete and Melody. Melody Jennings, she's such a gem. So you can see my videos there. They've been copied and pasted there. So that's a brand new Rumble channel. Please go follow me, because I only have 1 follower. And so that's a brand new thing. So what I want to do is 15-minute videos that break up this story in a little 15-minute bites so that people can get information about this kind of stuff.
That's awesome. I'm excited for that. I love when creators, because not everybody like has their own podcast, but they've been on so many podcasts that it's nice to see them all in one place. That way you can just go flow and listen to them. There's been some people that I've had to go like on wild goose chases looking for their interviews. I'm like, I know you have some out here. So I love how you've organized these and you're starting to put them all in their own catalog. And I love even more that you're going to start talking and sort of doing your own type of episode and content. Cause girl, you were made for this type of thing. Like, I think all of the, Hollywood stuff that you went through and, being able to use your voice the way that you did, like your diaphragm was trained for you to speak, and for you to use your voice and to speak loud. And I think this is your path. Like you have a beautiful voice and I hope that you still use it for singing. And I love that, you're able now to use those gifts that you spent so much time developing. And now you can use them to share stories with people and help validate people and help them, and reach more people this way too. There's only so much that we can do sometimes in a day over the phone. And this is a way for you to, you can still do what you're doing behind the scenes and helping survivors. And then this way you can reach so many more people than you could normally in a day. And I love that you're out there, you spend a lot of time for free doing all of this outreach. And so, okay, let's talking about your Twitter thing with whoever said that you don't deserve tips doesn't know what they're talking about either, because I'm sorry, but you deserve to be able to make a living doing this. And it's so generous of you to give so much for free, but girl, you deserve a tip. You deserve tips on everything that you do, so don't let that discourage you. We need to be funding survivors, allowing them to do this for their living, and, equipment, podcast stuff, like it all costs money and time is money. So like, for anybody who is saying that, like I'm on the side of, we need to be trying to get survivors into career paths where they're able to do this and they don't have to go, source money from somewhere else or have a regular job. Like you should be able to do this full time. So we need to all be tipping you. So if you get a little tip thing on here, like let's freaking promote it and go give you $1 or $5 or $1 million. You deserve all of it.
Yeah, I think what I would like to do is, I do federal pension law, and I would really, really love to stop doing that because, it pays the bills. But I would love if I could just devote my time to helping survivors, because my experience is really just, it's deep and wide and it helps a lot of people. And I want to continue to do that for God, if nothing else. And I'm also going to be putting some videos up there of my music, of my songs. So not just videos, but I even asked myself, well, why are you doing a podcast? You're a singer. But I'm just like, okay, this is what God wants me to do right now. So that's what I'm doing.
Yes, you could do both. Absolutely. You shouldn't stop singing. You should keep singing and share with us. You have a beautiful voice.
Well, that's what I plan to do. I want to do some 15-minute intel updates to enlighten people as to like some of the world issues that I'm researching, because I'm deep and wide in that area too. But people have said, okay, as long as you just put a little song at the end. So that's my plan.
Intro and outro. Yes, you can. You can do your own jingles.
Yeah. So, well, that's my plan.
Perfect. And then I'll have, okay, so I have all of your info. If there's anything else, like if there's any websites or anything that you think of that we didn't go over, feel free to send them if you have any resources or anything. Is there anything else that you wanted to talk about before we wrap up today?
Well, I think I've talked enough.
I could talk to you for 10 hours. I hope that you'll come back on. I know that there's so much more to your story. So hopefully we can get you on again, more than once even. But I'd love to share, even more about your story, maybe talking about the foster care side of things and, even the medical side. I'd love to pick your brain about some of that. So I hope that you'll come on again. This was amazing what you shared today. I learned so much. I know everybody else did too. And like I said, Casey, you are exactly what your name says. You are an absolute ray of sunshine, my darling.
Thank you, love. Thank you so much. You're so beautiful.
Oh, so are you. This is so great. I'm glad we finally got to connect. And everybody, I'm going to have all of Casey's links down below. Go support her new Rumble channel. Go find her on Twitter. Go get a consultation with her, you guys. Like, that's amazing. Therapy and counseling and consults, like they're usually really expensive, and you have somebody here willing to devote her time to you for free. So
Yeah.
if you are somebody who is struggling with that and wants to pick the brain of an actual survivor, and sometimes even therapists, if they're not survivors, I know it can be a little bit intimidating to trust them with this really hard information. You don't know how it's going to be received. You don't know if you're going to be called crazy by them or, discredited or turned away because they don't want to deal with it. So,
Yeah.
you have an actual survivor here who understands all these different layers of programming and satanic ritual abuse and MK Ultra and Hollywood and targeting and, and foster care and family court. Like, she knows all of it. So I would highly recommend you guys go reach out to her, and to go hype her on Twitter. The more eyes we get on survivors, the better. It helps the enemy know that they're not getting away with what they're doing and that we care.
Amen.
It also puts that level of protection. If they do try any funny business, it's not going to happen silently and quietly, that we let them know that we have eyes on people like Casey. So I want all you guys to go support her. I'll be sharing all of her links to you. They'll be in the show notes. You guys can just go in the show notes. There'll be hyperlinks. Just click and it'll direct you right to the page. So go support her, go hype her, go give her some love, go support her videos, and just surround her and pray for her too. Pray for her health, pray for her
Yeah.
family's health, pray for the safety of her family, from a health perspective as well as safety. She does risk a lot coming out and she is still going through targeting. So we want to
Mhm.
make sure that we're wrapping her in love and protection and her whole family too. So I'll have all that below, you guys. I'm going to have all my information in the show notes. Follow me on all different platforms too. I never know if I'm going to be deleted one place or another. So the more we can keep in touch, different platforms, the better. You
Yeah.
guys are awesome. Thank you guys so much for always supporting the show, for supporting the guests. We couldn't do this without you. God bless you all, and we will see you next time.